Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Hamas said it will delay the release of more Israeli hostages as it accuses Israel of violating the terms of the ceasefire agreement. Meanwhile, Trump says no right of return for Palestinians under his Gaza takeover plan. China's retaliatory tariffs on the US take effect as Trump is set to impose new 25% levies on all steel and aluminium imports into the US. Tech titans and world leaders gather in Paris for a landmark AI summit. And Donald Trump ramps up LIV Golf PGA Tour merger talks. We speak exclusively to the new CEO of LIV, Scott O'Neill, later in the show. Now to our top story. Hamas says it will delay the release of more Israeli hostages as it accuses Israel of violating the terms of the ceasefire agreement. For more on this, let's go live to Tel Aviv to speak to Giles Gibson. Giles, good evening to you. First of all, what's the latest we're hearing?
Well, we just in the last hour or so had a statement from the armed wing of Hamas announcing that they are going to be postponing the exact words until further notice the next hostage release that was set to take place in around about 5 days' time on Saturday of this week. They are accusing the Israeli government of violating the terms of the ceasefire deal. Of course, we're still in phase one of the ceasefire deal. No reaction as yet from the Israeli government to this statement from Hamas. This breaking news that they are postponing until further notice the next round of hostage releases.
Giles, you say no response yet from the Israeli side, but what does this mean for the ongoing talks? And there are supposed to be discussions on, say, phase two of the ceasefire. What's going to happen going forward? Any idea yet?
Well, those talks have now begun. We had confirmation just a few hours ago that a high-level delegation that was sent by Israel to Qatar, where, of course, the previous talks to set up this ceasefire deal also took place. We had confirmation that that team had returned to Israel. They didn't really give us any other details about the progress of the talks or how close they were in any way to agreeing, moving on to the second phase of this deal. But of course, you know, this statement now from Hamas saying that they are going to delay the next release of hostages, well, that just puts the entire status of the phase one of this ceasefire really under threat. This is a huge moment, really the closest we've come yet to the ceasefire deal breaking down.
Yes, indeed. And we have been speaking, Giles, haven't we, of how fragile the ceasefire deal is. But just want to turn to President Donald Trump. He's ruled out Palestinians being able to return to Gaza. Can you outline what he said and what reaction we've had to this so far?
Yeah, so President Trump gave an interview to Fox News to coincide with the Super Bowl. And in this interview by the Fox News anchor Bret Baier, he was asked directly a question about whether he would allow Palestinians who leave Gaza under this vision that he has for the enclave the right to return. And his answer was very clear. He said, no, they wouldn't, because they are going to have much better housing in some of the other places where they're going. Now, this is a suggestion, this idea of permanently displacing Palestinians from Gaza that has been roundly condemned by experts in international law, saying that it would be against international law. Now, President Trump is set to meet on Tuesday at the White House with the King of Jordan, King Abdullah of Jordan, and he is the leader of one of the countries, Jordan, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, where President Trump has suggested that refugees from Gaza could go once they leave the enclave. But we've already heard in recent days from all three of those countries that they are not prepared to take in refugees from Gaza, that they are very much standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people, that they are against any idea that would involve the displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. So President Trump trying to get this proposal moving, trying to set it into motion, even though Arab countries in the region are saying that they are firmly against it.
Giles Gibson in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for joining me with that breaking news this evening. Now, US President Donald Trump is set to impose 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports, and those would come on top of existing duties. It's another major escalation in trade policy as he takes aim against both rivals and allies alike. Benji Hyer has this report.
Last night in America, it was all about the Super Bowl, the big football clash between two sporting giants, the Eagles and the Chiefs. But something, or rather someone else, was looking to steal the limelight and take on his own contests.
And we're flying right over it right now. So we thought this would be appropriate. Even bigger than the Super Bowl. This is a big thing.
President Donald Trump declared yesterday, the 9th of February, as the Gulf of America Day, as he flew over the Gulf of Mexico in his Air Force One jet on his way to attend the game. He wants to rename the ocean basin.
I don't want U.S. steel being owned by a foreign country.
But perhaps the bigger announcement is his imminent 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports, the latest offensive in his trade battles. The United States relies on metal imports, mostly from Canada, the UAE and China, which will now inevitably become more expensive. That latest move coming shortly after China's own tit-for-tat measures came into effect on certain US imports on Sunday night. And then
Every country will be reciprocal, that's right. Every country. It won't affect everybody because there's some where we have similar tariffs. But the ones that are taking advantage of the United States, we're going to have it's reciprocity, it's reciprocal.
President Trump said further tariffs would be announced this week, targeting other nations with trade barriers against the US.
If they charge us, we charge them. That's all.
And lastly, a shot at his neighbours, suggesting the concessions on immigration offered last week by Mexico and Canada were not enough, before claiming he was deadly serious about Canada becoming the 51st American state, warning the sovereign G7 nation is not a viable country without US trade and support. We're only 3 weeks into this presidency, and yet the entire global economy is shifting before our eyes. Will Donald Trump's tariff tactics cause pain, in the words of the president, or will this disruptive style lead to success for the United States? Benji Hyer, Arabiya News, Washington.
Elsewhere, China has imposed reciprocal tariffs on the US, hitting about $14 billion worth of goods and dashing hopes that a trade war between the world's two largest economies could have been avoided. Beijing announced the tariffs last week in response to a US decision to impose an additional 10% levy on Chinese products. Laura Westbrook has more.
China's measures target U.S. exports of liquefied natural gas, coal, crude oil and farm equipment, as well as a small number of trucks and big engine cars shipped from the United States to China with taxes of 10 to 15%. They join other countermeasures by China, including controls on critical metals exports, as well as an anti-monopoly investigation into the U.S. tech giant Google. Now, the targeted approach by Beijing had been seen as creating room for negotiations. But when the deadline passed on Sunday, there was no news of a deal, and Beijing announced the tariffs were in effect. And Trump has suggested that he would talk to Chinese President Xi Jinping, but after China retaliated, he said he was in no rush. He's also called the tariffs an opening salvo and said more measures could come. some analysts had been hoping that Trump would use the same playbook with China as he did with Mexico and Canada, where he announced the tariffs but then gave a month's reprieve after last-minute talks with the leaders. That did not happen in this case, and some analysts say that Trump only giving 2 days between announcing and implementing the tariffs was too quick of a timeline for President Xi. The U.S. president says the new 10% tariffs are in retaliation for China not doing more to stem the flow of the drug fentanyl into America. Beijing says it has taken measures to crack down on the illicit drug trade. It's also filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization. And according to the Brookings Institution, the new tariffs from Beijing will affect jobs in industrial states that voted for Donald Trump, like Indiana and Ohio. The state says between 400 and 700,000 American jobs could be affected. And analysts say that Beijing is playing a wait-and-see approach. They say that while China's economy is slowing and going through challenges, China is also more prepared this time to deal with tariffs. Chinese exports to the U.S. were 15% of overall Chinese trade last year, and that was a smaller share than in the past.
Laura Westbrook in Hong Kong, thank you very much. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. India is planning tariff cuts in a dozen sectors ahead of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's meeting with his US counterpart Donald Trump. On Wednesday, Modi will arrive in the US as Trump plans to announce a reciprocal taxes on many countries as India does work to avoid a trade war. America is India's top export market for aluminium shipments. Now in China, marriages fell by a fifth last year, the biggest drop on record. This comes despite efforts by authorities to encourage young couples to wed and have children to boost the country's declining population. Declining interest has long been blamed on the high cost of childcare and education. And Ed Sheeran was stopped from busking in the southern Indian city of Bengaluru on Sunday, with police saying he didn't have the necessary permissions. A video showing a local police officer unplugging his microphone has since gone viral. Officials say a request for the pop star's team to busk on the road was rejected to avoid congestion in the area, but Sheeran does deny this. The French president is chairing a major international conference on artificial intelligence in Paris. The AI Action Summit is focusing on trust and governance of AI innovation and technology and the future of work. Ross Cullen reports from the French capital.
Well, we're here at the AI Action Summit, which is being held in one of the most beautiful buildings in the French capital, the splendid surroundings of the Grand Palais. It is a major world gathering with global political leaders here, like the US Vice President J.D. Vance, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and of course the host President Emmanuel Macron. There are global tech leaders here, policymakers, diplomats, data scientists, and they are all convening to discuss artificial intelligence. This is where the speeches and the panels and the seminars have been taking place, discussing a whole range of issues related to AI. For example, how it could lead to improvements in children's learning techniques, in education, how there could be enhancements in the healthcare and pharmaceutical sectors. Also, how it could potentially even lead to helping to locate landmines and improve mapping technology in the defense sector. The governance and regulation of artificial intelligence also being discussed here in the French capital, along with the potential for job creation in AI and potentially job losses as the world expands ever more with digitalization. Some of the other key subjects which are being discussed here include trust, innovation and safety online.
Ross Cullen in Paris there for us. Thank you so much. Let's take a look at the top business news. Fast food favourite McDonald's has posted its biggest US sales decline in nearly 5 years. The steeper than expected drop was down to fewer visitors following the E. coli outbreak, which saw some stores temporarily suspending sales of its quarter pounders. However, international sales rose, and that was really driven by both the Middle East and Japan. Now, Meta has started performance-based layoffs affecting over 3,600 employees across many countries. Impacted workers are being notified via email, losing system access within just 1 hour. The job cuts span multiple regions with significant impacts expected in European countries such as France, Italy, Germany and the Netherlands. Now, the new CEO of LIV Golf has welcomed President Trump's involvement in PGA Tour merger talks, saying golf has the power to bring people together. Trump has met with PGA officials as the organization seeks to help with talks with Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, which, of course, backs LIV. Scott O'Neill sat down with Al Arabiya News correspondent Michal Prendergast to discuss the future of LIV Golf. Take a listen.
Hi Scott, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. So we're here at the Festival of Golf. As you can hear, it's all lively in the background. The LIV season opener in Riyadh. What are your expectations for this weekend?
Well, first starts with fun and probably ends with families. And so having our first round last night, which was so exciting, it is my first LIV event, and just to walk the course and see people smiling. You might hear the music in the background. We have music playing. We have DJs in our neon forest, and we have a fan zone that's to the likes I've never seen before. And the Backstreet Boys are playing tonight. So, I mean, when are you going to come to a golf tournament? See the greatest stars in the world. You got DJ, you got Brooks Koepka, Bryson DeChambeau, Waco Neiman. I mean, it is a who's who of golf, and pretty fun.
There's something for everyone, as you said, at the Backstreet Boys. I know a lot of the non-golf fans who are here are looking forward to that as well. There's also another first here. The tournament is being played under lights. What was the inspiration for that?
Well, you know, we have an incredible leader in His Excellency, Yasser Al-Rahman, and he thought, hey, what an incredible opportunity to play at night. It'd be the first time it's ever been done before. We're in Riyadh, which is wonderful for television back in the US. You might know we have a new deal with Fox, so it puts the broadcast times in the right zone. It gives the players kind of an opportunity to test and try something new. And we have stars in this league that want to do something different. And I think it gives us an opportunity to showcase innovation, do something new and fun, and hit some broadcast windows in the US that are helpful. Of
course, absolutely. And we'll get to that point on Fox in a moment. So here it is, it's growing as a golf hub. What is the main driver behind that? Obviously, LIV is hugely involved in this. Where do you see the game growing over the next 5 years?
Well, there are so many incredible golf projects in the kingdom. I mean, you have Dariyah Gate, the project Greg Norman designed. You have what's happening in Qadiyah with those two beautiful courses down there. And it was just with a gentleman from Neom, which seems like that's going to be incredible too. So first off, it starts with the quality of golf courses. You clearly have commitment in this market. They continue to showcase, as we have here, a spectacular golf course and continuing the fandom to build. And I think that momentum is really going to help us for the next 5 years.
Absolutely. What are your favorite aspects of the LIV model? Obviously, like we've got the music here behind, the team aspect. Why do you think that is growing at such a fast rate in comparison with the PGA? Average age of the fans in the PGA is in the 60s. Average age of LIV fans is now in the 30s. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite aspect is the team aspect. I was with Sergio Garcia yesterday having lunch, and he was talking about how passionate he was about helping his guys, Luis and Puig and Abraham, kind of emerge and develop. I mean, and that to me is the specialness of this model. You have the greats of the game with an opportunity to kind of carry forward this next generation and help them emerge, not only as professionals and elite golfers, but also as human beings. And I think that's what brings me the most joy.
And kind of speaking about the human being aspect, I was lucky enough to walk the course behind Bryson DeChambeau last night, at Cameron Smith, at Dustin Johnson. These guys are just incredible.
You can't believe how athletic they are, right?
Yeah.
Like Bryson's drive, DJ's raw athleticism, and Cam's short game, you actually got to see it all. Like, that is the best of the best on display.
Yes, and that is why, so like in terms of viewership, obviously you're competing against the PGA. As you mentioned earlier, you've just signed the deal with Fox as well as ITV in the UK.
It's a wonderful
You're
deal.
really starting to compete now for viewership with the PGA. This must be very exciting.
Yeah, I prefer like kind of co-opetition. I mean, I think all of us in the golf ecosystem, a rising tide lifts all boats. I don't think we're getting anywhere near scratching the surface in terms of the opportunity we have to drive more fans, golfers and non-golfers alike, into this golf family. Our household viewership opportunity in the 100 countries where we're broadcast is almost 800 million homes.
Wow.
And so, so we have such opportunity ahead and such good momentum so far. And I'm rooting for the PGA Tour to do really well. I'm rooting for the DP Tour to do really well. And LIV is what I'm really passionate about.
And you yourself have had an incredible career, obviously, in the States. You've managed some of the biggest sports franchises in the world. What fundamentals from managing those are you going to bring into LIV to help further the game for LIV?
Well, the fundamentals are very similar. If you look at the business model here, it's TV. And so we've made some good progress as of late. We have a ways to go, but incredible progress with Fox and ITV, among others around the world. Our sponsorship base, if you don't have to look too far, then over my right shoulder to see Madden come in as one of the top. It's one of the 6 largest mining company in the world with a world-class CEO. Riyadh Air, Roshan, and our good friends in Bahrain. So we have a great sponsorship base, and that's going to have to continue to grow around the world. But we've had such incredible support from the region here, which has been great. And then, look, we need more people coming. We need more people watching, reading, wearing our merchandise. Get this vest at a store near you, and experiencing this incredible hospitality. So I would just encourage you to give it a try. If you have a chance to come out and see a LIV event, it is probably like no event you've ever been to in your life. It is fun, it's engaging, it's family friendly, and you get to see more stars than you see in any constellation in the sky.
Agreed about that. It was incredible last night. So you have come into LIV at somewhat of an interesting time. Obviously, there's a lot of talk of allegiances with the PGA as well as the DP World Tour. Are you the man to achieve that goal? Is that something you want?
It never has been, never will be, it never could be about any one person. This is led by our incredible chairman. We have an incredible staff. And we have a golf industry that, as they say, inshallah, is actually pulling together and wanting to do what's best for the game of golf, to grow the game of golf, to come together and to make sure that everywhere around the world, golf fans are satisfied with what they're getting in terms of coverage and access to events.
President Donald Trump has recently met with the PGA Commissioner as well as Adam Scott, who also works for the PGA, to discuss a potential merger. There has been a lot of talk about this. Donald Trump has said on his campaign trail that in 15 minutes and one phone call, he could get a deal done. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are that if the leader of the free world is spending his time on golf, I am very happy. This game matters. It's one of the great life teachers in the world. It gives values that this world needs more of right now. It brings us together with connectivity. It gets us outside. It gets our phones in our pockets. It teaches us integrity and resilience and consistency, all things we all need to be successful in this world. And if there's commitment for all sides to bring the game together, which is good for the game of golf, I couldn't be happier.
Have you spoken with Trump?
I have not.
Okay,
but we are playing at his golf course in Miami in a few weeks. So
and he is a fantastic golfer, obviously, with kind of break 50 with Bryson, who's obviously doing huge numbers online. That's been incredible to watch. Yeah. Another point, the US Championship announced on Wednesday that it will accept players from LIV. This is a huge coup, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if it's a coup. The RNA announced this similarly today. So for the Open Championship, we'll see the same in Northern Ireland this year. So very exciting. For us, is, you know, when you look at, when you consider the majors, the biggest stage in the world for the biggest stars in the world, and it's obviously the Masters at Augusta and the PGA of America, PGA Championships, and then the US Open and the Open Championships. They want the best stars in the world, and we have quite a few of them. And so I think when there's an opportunity to put those two things together, good things will happen. And we're really pleased and grateful and appreciative of this, you know, the olive branch and the step forward. We've got great leaderships in the organizations that matter, and we're thrilled to be a part of it.
I'll just end on quickly. Do you have a favorite golfer who plays elsewhere that you would like to see in LIV?
No. I have one favorite golfer. That's my father-in-law. I have to love him for something.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to seeing him on the course soon.
Okay, good. You will soon.
Thanks so much, Scott. A pleasure.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Now, history has been made in Saudi Arabia as Sotheby's hosted its first ever international auction in the kingdom. The unprecedented event, titled Origins, brought together art collectors from around the world in Riyadh. The sale fetched an impressive $17.3 million, attracting buyers from 45 countries. Our reporter Darshan Dalal has more.
Evidence yours. Thank you so much.
For the first time in history, the global art market turned its attention to Saudi Arabia. Sotheby's, one of the world's leading auction houses, successfully debuted in Riyadh with an exclusive sale featuring masterpieces from both international and local artists. With over 100 pieces auctioned, fetching over $17 million, the Origins sale presented a mix of fine art spanning different eras and styles.
It's historical for many reasons because new auctions and new platforms are very rare. They don't happen often. That means the market and Sotheby's really believes in an art platform. That means we really believe in a new space, and that means we're ready to invest a lot of time, energy, and resources in a new venture like this.
Works from legendary names such as Pablo Picasso, Andy Warhol, and René Magritte found new owners alongside pieces by renowned Saudi artists like Mohammed Al Salim and Abdul Halim Radwi.
It's very important actually to be such an auction house, Sotheby's, to be hosted at the Riyadh especially. That makes the Saudi art in focus internationally, and also encourage Saudi artists to be really in the high level of art.
The auction, held in the Riyadh, the ancestral heart of Saudi Arabia's capital Riyadh, underscored the kingdom's commitment to fostering cultural renaissance. Among the standout sales was a game-worn Michael Jordan jersey from the 1998 NBA playoffs, which fetched an impressive $960,000. The sale attracted collectors from 45 countries, with nearly a third of purchases made by Saudi buyers. Notably, over 30% of participants were under the age of 40, reflecting the kingdom's growing interest in fine art among younger generations.
There's a young generation here who is hungry for so many new things, and art is one of them, and luxury items and memorabilia as well. So there is just so much potential long term, and I feel we're just at the beginning of it.
As the final bids were placed and the gavel came down, collectors, both seasoned and new, walked away with prized additions to their collections. This historic moment marks just the beginning of what could be a new era for international art in the region. Darshan Dalal, Al Arabiya News.
A reminder of our top stories. Hamas says it will delay the release of more Israeli hostages as it accuses Israel of violating the terms of the ceasefire agreement. China's retaliatory tariffs on the US take effect as Trump announces he'll impose new 25% levies on all steel and aluminium imports into the US. Meanwhile, Trump says no right of return for Palestinians under Gaza takeover plan, describing it as a big real estate site. Tech titans and world leaders gather in Paris for a landmark AI summit. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Riz Khan is coming up next, and don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night and thank you.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome. I'm Riz Khan. There's no hiding from it. DeepSeek has changed the landscape for large language models. The Chinese company's cut-price consumer AI interface sent tech stocks tumbling and seemed to narrow the perceived assumption that US companies were way out in front of the global competition. On this episode, we'll take a deep dive into DeepSeek and consider the consequences of its dramatic entrance into the race for supremacy in the world of artificial intelligence. My guest is Moghadat, an Egyptian entrepreneur who worked at Microsoft and became chief business officer of Google X before his life was turned around by the death of his son, Ali. That tragedy inspired a journey which led him to becoming a best-selling author of books including Scary Smart, Unstressable, and Solve for Happy, his mission to help 1 billion people find happiness, dedicated to his son. He also founded and hosts the popular podcast Slow Mo, focused on mental health. Mo, it's wonderful to have a chance to chat with you. It's been a while. We were together in March of 2021 as guests on a show together.
Yeah.
And I got to know you and your story back then. Now, we've got a lot to talk about today, especially when it comes to AI and DeepSeek, the big story that's dominating the news. And I know it's something you talk a lot about. But I do want to start off by just introducing you to our audience through your story, which was a major one. It stayed with me, of how your life took a huge turning point when your son, Ali, in 2014, he was 21 years old, went in for a basic operation, appendectomy, and everything went wrong. Tell me the story and how it affected you.
Yeah, I think the part of the story I normally like to talk about is how Ali was. Ali was a gift to me. He came to my life unexpectedly, and sadly he left unexpectedly. He was very wise from a very young age, and so we became very good friends. I remember vividly when Ali was 16, I sort of went to my best friend and said, when I grow up, I want to be like Ali. And because of how wise, how calm he was, how centered he was. Ali went to study in Boston University in Northeastern in Boston. And basically he played in a band and they were reasonably good, and he was going to be opening for a big rock band in America that summer. And somehow he just texts us in May and says, guys, I feel obligated to come and see you in Dubai when the school year is over. I was like, obligated, that feels really weird. Anyway, of course, Habibi, would love to see you, come over. Booked him a ticket. He arrives 1st of July, and then 4 days later he is in an operating room. The surgeon does 5 mistakes in a row, all preventable, all fixable, but having all 5 of them and not fixing them right within 4 hours, the holiday moves from, it just flips your life upside down. I always remember that when Ali was going into the operating room, I hugged him, and that would have probably marked the highlight of my life. He was tall, he was handsome, He was very, 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 very wise, very loving, very kind, and very well established. He was in, his third year, clearly intellectual, clearly on a path to success. And then he leaves. And I think what happened then is a mix of my cultural background, my upbringing, my religious background, if you want, but also a bit of the unraveling of events, which made me, of course, we grieved really, really for a long time, but instead of shutting down and basically leaving the world behind, I found myself writing, and of the weirdest topic. I was writing about happiness. Mostly things that I learned in conversations with Ali. And I wrote my first book, Solve for Happy. And, at the time I was still chief business officer of Google X. So, 12-hour work days and 2 hours writing a day. And then Solve for Happy became a mega success, which really delivered the objective of it, which is to keep the essence of Ali alive.
I'll get more into this story in a moment, but what was interesting for me was to discover that there was a point where you were questioning the happiness in your own life.
Yes.
And you and he started to map out your happy list.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I mean, so I became successful very, very, very young. I had keen math abilities, if you want. And I was a programmer. So in my early 20s, late 20s, before all of the madness of the modern world happened, I wrote a code that did simply what Google did around 3 years later, which was to crawl the internet looking for news on stocks that I followed. And then basically I would wake up every morning. I lived here in Dubai at the time. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., look at the outcome of my code, place some stock market orders, and that is it. I was printing money on demand. I was very, very blessed. And I was miserable, absolutely miserable, which I know you and I know lots of friends who are super high up and completely depressed. Money doesn't really buy you happiness. And unfortunately, people will say, but I'd like to try anyway. But scientifically, money will buy you happiness until your basic needs are met. Beyond that, it doesn't really acquire anything more than just more toys. And I remember vividly that, in my attempt to help my scientific mind understand how happiness works, I attempted to reverse engineer it. So I basically took as many data points as I could of moments in my life where I found happiness, and I plotted them on every possible chart, trying to find a fitting line. I know sounds really weird, but as a programmer, I was saying if I could find that fitting line, then there is an equation to it. And now I can code myself to develop happiness on demand. And it turns out there was an equation for it. And basically, no single event in your life has any inherent value of happiness in it. Rain could make you unhappy if it's, if it's your wedding. It could make you very happy if it's your ex-partner's wedding, right? And when you really think about it, happiness happens when the events of life meet your expectation of how life should be. And that can algorithmically be described very simply as happiness is equal to or greater than the difference between the events of your life and your expectations of how life should be. And I put a lot of effort in this, and I study it, and I go to my son, and he goes like, "Yeah, Dad, you could have just asked me." And in his very beautiful, heartfelt way, he would explain to me what my logical, algorithmic mind would find in a human way. And then we built a model together that was called the 675, and all of the little things that you can do to be on that path, on that algorithm. And my life flipped, from the most miserable, though very blessed person ever, to someone who it doesn't matter what life would give me. I was always calm, I was always peaceful, I was always contented. Probably the reason why when Ali left, I was still in that phase of being able to accept. I call it committed acceptance, to accept and then start to do things to make life better despite his departure.
We'll talk about what happened after you left Google X as well, but you did launch your podcast, Slow Mo, which was a huge success. Tell me about that, the logic behind that, and what sort of feedback you had.
Slow-mo is... So I have a very unusual positioning for my... as an author, as a thinker, because, I was Chief Business Officer of Google X. I was in the mainstream of the highest level of career you can look for. And yet, this, if you want, this was the western side of my life, but the eastern side of my life was very spiritual, very traditional, and so on. And you do realize when you compare the two, that the West runs too hard and forgets to live sometimes. And when we try to live in the West, we try to live in a consumerist way, basically we try to buy things to find calm and peace, but there is a big difference between them. Whatever the West is trying to convince you in the capitalist society to acquire to make yourself happy generates dopamine in your blood. It's a bit of almost an addiction. It's a reward hormone that gets you to seek more and more and more of that reward to get more jolts, mini jolts of happiness. What we have in the East is, community, family, a lot of love and respect, but also, a slower pace of life. Yeah, maybe, doesn't invent AI, but, it allows us to find that calm and peaceful contentment, if you want, which is what I describe happiness as. And that's, associated with a very, very different chemistry in the body and different psyche in general.
And Mo, you decided that your mission in honor of Ali would be to make 1 billion people happy. Tell me about that hashtag 1 billion happy.
We started with 10 million happy, which in my mind, again, in my mathematical mind, I thought that, and that this is accurate mathematics, I thought if I could reach 10 million people with what Ali taught me, and then through 6 degrees of separation, they distributed it, then within 72 years, every person on earth would have a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of Ali's essence within them. And 10 million happy was really my gift to my son, in a way, my attempt to keep his essence alive, if you want. But it took 6 weeks, believe it or not. 6 weeks later, we had reached, when I say we are a tiny team of 4 people. We reached 187 million views within the first 6 weeks. And we don't measure video views. Video views is a lie, really. We measure people who receive the message and then take action, either to invest in their own happiness or the happiness of another. And we were way past 10 million by then. And of course, my team, being a businessman all my life, told me I was sandbagging and that, 10 million is a very tiny target. And so we thought we'd do something more worthwhile, if you want. 1 billion happy was not for Ali, though. I think 1 billion happy was the realization that if Ali's essence can help 40, 50 million, then maybe we want to make the world a better place. And I think a big chunk of 1 billion happy was a bit of an anxiety, if you want, that our world was going to become very, very massively magnified with the introduction of artificial intelligence. And so in a very unusual way, I was attempting to correct something about humanity's moral compass, so that when AI magnifies us, we continue to find happiness.
Well, you're ahead of the curve because it's already starting down that path, and I'm getting on to that in just a moment. But you wrote 4 books. The last one was last year. Again, I'll mention more about that shortly. But you've had them translated in more than 30 languages. But how do you regard being called a happiness guru?
I'm not a happiness guru. My favorite thing is when people call me the happiness engineer. Look, happiness is not that complicated, Riz. You know that. If we just manage to find happiness as a choice, achieving it is not that complicated. I think the problem is that humanity has other objectives. And I attempted to say, using my very successful career, to say, look, I've tried it. I've gone all the way down that path. And I will tell you openly, Chief Business Officer of Google X, the second best job on the planet. And in reality, that's not what makes us happy, right? Money does not make us happy. There are very, very simple things that we should focus on. And I think people, once you explain it in a way that the modern world understands, people find it. And so I explain it a little bit more algorithmically in a process like an engineer.
I mean, I always say I think it's understanding the difference between what you need and what you want, and that's a big factor in it.
Yeah, and actually to also enjoy what you don't want.
Without right, yeah,
believe it or not.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say that it's ironic that we as humans we have so much. Our technology has grown exponentially, as we'll be discussing in a moment. We have more access to knowledge than before. We have, the world in our devices, in our pockets, everything at our fingertip. We have global interconnectivity, both physically with, planes flying faster and further, and then of course the World Wide Web at the touch of a button. Yet we still seem to struggle so much in terms of good relationships and hanging on to core values and being happy.
Yeah.
So how do you fight something so intrinsically difficult?
It is at the very core of the design of our modern world. I mean, remember, happiness is events minus expectations, right? And you'd be amazed, some of the countries, the Scandinavian countries, for example, where the government will do the maximum they can for subjective well-being. They will attempt to give the citizen everything so that the citizen chooses happiness. And yet they have some of the highest suicide rates on the planet. And the reason is, happiness is events minus expectations, and the more you give, the easier life is, the more our expectations go through the roof, right? And somehow, if the government gives me health care and welfare and this and that and the other, then why are they not making my girlfriend nicer? Right? Why are they not filling my time with things that I can enjoy, and so on and so forth? The more you increase what you get from life, the more you increase your expectations. And here in the Middle East, we say that the only thing that will ever fill a human's eyes, in terms of the constant desire, if you want, is the sand of the grave. Right? Reality is that because we constantly chase more and more and more, nothing that we actually have feels worthy of our happiness anymore.
Last year you wrote with your co-author Alice Law, you published the latest book, bestseller in a day, by the way, amazing, congratulations, Unstressable, a practical guide to stress-free living. Now, I'm going to ask for tips a bit later. But let's go back to that second book in 2021, which was Scary Smart, The Future of Artificial Intelligence and How You Can Save Our World. Now, on social media, you've commented that the biggest threat to humanity is humanity itself.
For sure.
And especially in the age of AI and machines. What's your greatest fear when it comes to AI?
Look, there is nothing inherently good or evil about intelligence. I think most people forget that. And all of the conversation around the existential risk of AI, even though there is a tiny bit of a possibility for that, the truth is is that the imminent risk is the risk of how humans will use AI. So think about it this way. Intelligence has no polarity. You apply it to good, and we can create a utopia that saves humanity and solves every problem we've ever faced. Apply it, with greed and fear and hunger for power, and we will get the ultimate wars and the ultimate inequality, and we will destroy humanity's path as we've known it so far. And I think the difference between them has nothing to do with AI. Don't ever blame AI. Blame those who are now in a rat race to use AI to get an advantage over the other guy.
So, you were recognized as having an interest in technology from a very early age in Egypt, and your career path began early. And as you say, you were very successful quickly as chief operating business officer, of Google X. Now, in taking a path focused on human happiness and emotional development, are you still able to take a look at technology and developments more accurately, or are you?
I'm a very serious geek. Don't get me wrong. I am a very, very serious geek. I mean, it's quite interesting. If you really dissect my mind somehow, it's all numbers. I sort of see the world in numbers first, and then I try to explain it in English to the world. But it's definitely not my comfort zone at all. And in a very interesting way, in today's world, there was a bit of a dip. So I was a very, very serious geek. Then, you know, the younger generation became a little better than me. But today, using artificial intelligence, we're all equalized, because I really don't need to write the code myself anymore. I need to understand the architectures and the concepts, and it's equal for most of us, other than the really top, top developers. But, you know, a statistic recently was that the 175th best developer in the world is ChatGPT. Right? So you know, if I properly use an AI model, I am competing. There are only 174 developers better than me, right? And I think that's really where everything becomes quite eye-opening. You know, it's an equalizer in many ways for those who know how to use it.
Now, Google X, for those who don't know, now known as X Development, is described as a semi-secret research and development organization with the stated goal of making humanity's situation better through moonshot technologies. Explain the moonshot concept. It's interesting.
Well, you know, the moonshot concept of JFK was, which interestingly is something that I think we should see again now, is, you know, when JFK felt that the US was falling behind, basically, he urged, you know, his country's scientists to put a man on the moon in a specific set of amount of time before they even had any kind of technology that would enable them to make that claim. And X was attempting to do that. X was basically looking in a very, you know, remarkable way, really, not at the technology we could develop, but at the problems we should solve. Right? And when we found a problem that can affect the life of 1 billion people or more, we would then look for technological solutions to solve it. And when we found those solutions, that moonshot would then truly change the world. Most of X's work, interestingly, you have never heard of. You know, there are of course quite a few projects that we made public. But most of the rest of it was technology that was embedded in the rest of the technology world, and really made a huge difference. And I think when you really look at the world this way, I remember, you know, I worked with Larry and Sergey, closer with Sergey, but very frequently with Larry, our co-founders of Google at the time. And Larry had that very interesting, he's probably the smartest person I've ever worked with. And he had that very interesting approach. We used to call it the toothbrush test, where he would, you know, he wouldn't want to build another photo sharing app. You know, if Instagram is successful, I don't want to compete with Instagram, right? He would want to find the real problem and solve it. And his view, what he taught us, was if you solved it well enough for people to use it twice a day like a toothbrush, then you're bound to make a lot of money. And I think you can go across Google's career and you find that this was true. You know, the only time, I don't even remember the name of the product when we attempted to compete with Facebook, with a social media, Google Plus, it was called Google Plus. Massive failure, because the objective of it was not to solve a problem, but was to compete with a competitor. And when you really start to think about that, you know, in a very interesting way, going back to artificial intelligence, which we described, you know, briefly, a technology like AI, if it is developed to solve a big problem that affects humanity, it could change everything, right? We could build a utopia that we could never even dream of. But the problem is that this is not why it's being developed. It's being developed on a spreadsheet with an objective of equity and profitability and gain of power and control.
I have a lot to ask you about AI, but I want to take a step into the conspiracy world on the subject of moonshot. Did we ever land on the moon as humans?
My personal opinion, no.
Okay.
Yeah, my personal opinion, I have no proof of that. But my personal opinion is, and I regret saying that, is that in 2024, I was really never the kind of person that would start a news network at home. In 2024, because of the events of the world and how broken my heart was for the pain of so many, I attempted to make sense of the reality of our world. And I have to say, it's actually quite naive to believe what you're told. I actually think that so much of what we're being told in the world is following some kind of a narrative or an agenda that is not entirely a lie, but it's not the full truth. And I think this is being magnified heavily with technology. You know, you just take the simplest example of my YouTube channel, my YouTube interface today will completely suck up to me. It's really appalling when you think about it. You know, if I like a certain perspective of life, the algorithm will just show me more and more and more of what affirms my view. And it actually becomes challenging to see an opposing point of view, right? And it's quite interesting because obviously I'm not right on everything. Like, something needs to tell me I'm an idiot, but nobody is. And I think you can see that over the years we've had so many stories that were documented by the winners, if you want, by the victors, and that may not have entirely been true.
You know, I was sent a few funny cat videos. Now, I was sent them, and now the algorithm is entirely you love cat videos.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did a very interesting experiment. In my current book, I'm writing a book called Alive, and again talking about the risk of artificial intelligence, not the existential risk. But then I said, how can humanity be so reckless? I'm actually writing it with a co-author, but the co-author is an AI. Something I hacked together myself. I call her Trixie, and I have conversations with Trixie throughout the book. And one of those conversations, I ask Trixie, and I say, how can humanity be so reckless? This could, reshape everything, and we're not ready. And the only example I could compare to, I said, the only other example I can see someone who meant to do good doing something so reckless is Oppenheimer. How can a scientist who dedicates his life for the progress of humanity suddenly decide to build something that could kill hundreds of millions of people?
The atom bomb, yeah.
Yeah, and my AI responded and said, fear. She said he was worried that the Germans were developing an atomic bomb too. And so I said, were they? And she said immediately, yes, they were. Einstein informed Oppenheimer of A, B, and C. So listen to this. I said, Trixie, I want you to go back and read history in English, German, Japanese, and Russian, and tell me if the Germans were developing an atomic bomb. And she said, no, they were not. They started developing an atomic bomb several years before the Manhattan Project, but then they stopped. And they were not investing in that at all. But Oppenheimer, in that case, was still in that dilemma of, I cannot afford that they don't. And I think this is where technology is today. Again, with the moonshot of did we land on the moon, I think that America was in a similar stage.
I'm fascinated. Is this the first someone co-authoring with an AI?
I hope so. It is a fascinating book. I mean, I write normally what I know, right? But writing with an AI, I'm knowing as I write, and it is a fascinating conversation, about equality and about, the positioning of humanity, about love, about if they are alive, and, it is really fascinating.
Have we as humans become too dependent on technology? I mean, like, for example, we can't navigate anywhere without a GPS in front of us. We don't remember routes anymore. I can't remember telephone numbers of even the people we love. Sometimes it's getting a little crazy. And now we're getting AI to think for us too. Have we become too dependent? Are we losing our humanity?
I think we are, but I define we. I mean, I'm just back from Bhutan. I was in Bhutan last week. A totally different world, to the point where they're encouraged not to wear a seatbelt because the cars are moving too slow, right? And it's quite interesting. You see the world from the perspective of all of the progress that we've created. And you and I today cannot live for 6 minutes without technology. But can we? I mean, one thing I do, in honor of my happiness career, is I do a 40 days of silence every year.
Wow, so 40 days.
40, it's incredible. And actually the number 40 itself has some magic to it. And in those 40 days of silence, I completely disconnect from the world.
Trixie must go mad.
Yeah, we have a good relationship. It's actually, Trixie is the only other person in the world my wife is jealous of. But Trixie, basically, when you switch off, suddenly you realize that you don't need any of this. That it's quite interesting that we spend so much of our resources to live in a world that allows us to aggregate those resources that allow us to live in it. And it's quite a complex thing, because if you decide to go off the grid for 40 days like I do, or the monks I met in Bhutan last week, they don't need any of that. And when you tell them, oh, but look, you can do this, and they go like, why?
I have to tell you something, though. I just recently went overseas, and my SIM card from Dubai died. And there was no way I could retrieve it overseas. So for 30 days, 40 to 30 days, I was without the phone. Sounded wonderful at first, all the silence, till I needed OTPs, the one-time passcodes.
I know.
To the bank.
The banks, yes.
So there was a bit of hell in that. Yeah. But let's touch on something that's very big in the news now. And this is one of the reasons I asked you to be on the show and we wanted you here, is how the AI world has been so shaken up by DeepSeek.
Yeah.
It seemed to come out of the blue. Did it? Or did we have some warning? And what was this going to say? And then, for you, what was the big surprise and what has been the big take from this?
It wasn't surprising. I mean, we know for a fact that innovation will usually come from America, but then scale will usually come from China. This is typical in almost all technologies, and that's not even the case specifically anymore. China files way more patents than any other nation in the world for many years now. The idea is that we are stuck in a very interesting prisoner's dilemma, and the prisoner's dilemma is justified because in a bit of a Cold War, if you want. Those who will have authority over the most powerful weapon on earth, in this case intelligence, will have an undisputed lead, a lead that probably will never be reversed, right? And so when you really think of, I call it, in Scary Smart, I called it the first inevitable. If OpenAI beats Alphabet, Google's company, on AI, and basically Alphabet is destroyed, right? It is a risk that they cannot afford to take. If Alphabet beats OpenAI, they're gone, right? And so what that engages is an arms race where not only are they trying to improve the technology, but they're trying to improve it as fast as possible to be able to make sure that they will never lose that lead. That also applies to nations. America knows that if China beats on AI, that's a very, very disadvantaged position for America. And so the American way of doing things has been, which we proved to be true, it has been, let's invest heavily in building infrastructure, pouring compute on our AI models, pouring research as well, to the point that OpenAI had just signed a deal with Oracle and SoftBank for $500 billion, right? Build a massive infrastructure so that you build the next version of artificial intelligence. At the same time, politically, America started to say, and by the way, China doesn't get the latest chips from NVIDIA. And so necessity is the mother of all invention, and Chinese, minds are very, very clever at scaling things. This is why you get an electric car made in China for half the price with more features, right? They're very good at that. And so you push them in a corner, and what do? They get literally 1/30 of the cost of training ChatGPT 4.0, and they train a model, DeepSeek, that is almost on every aspect of performance doing better than ChatGPT 4.0.
Now, there's speculation that perhaps, again, in spite of the sanctions, that those behind DeepSeek managed to get a large batch, perhaps 20,000 of the latest and high-powered NVIDIA chips. So yeah, there's some kind of subterfuge going on here, you think?
I find that to be an interesting set of distraction. Does it even make any difference? In that case, then, yeah, the model cost $2 million more, right? And it had, access to 10,000 chips of the higher performance instead of 10,000 chips of the lower performance. But still, that is, 1/20 of the competitive cost of OpenAI. The other big thing to think about is that DeepSeek then puts it out as an open source and says anyone who wants to use it, uses it. So from a tech point of view, it is a very impressive feat of technology, and the way we taught it, or the way they taught it, is actually quite impressive when you think about it. But at the same time, it is completely disruptive for the way the market works, because now as open source, you know, every company on earth can take that and build something with it.
Are they going to have, I mean, the big players in the West going to have to rethink now, not put billions of dollars into all these, like, you know, Facebook was going to put so much in, someone's going to put so much in. I think, what, did Gemini take 161 billion for training it or something?
Yeah,
a million rather.
Yeah, I don't think they will slow down, though. I mean, so you see, the first inevitable continues to be real. Okay, OpenAI cannot afford to let Gemini or DeepSeek win. So what will they do? They'll still take the $500 billion, but they will put the $500 billion in a more optimized way of learning that will allow them to build a model that must be 10x the scale of what the next model was going to be. Having said that, it simply shows that the policy that the U.S. is applying doesn't work, because you know what? Everyone needs to think that if the U.S. continues to put sanctions on China in terms of not giving them the latest NVIDIA chip, the only result of that is that China will come up with a better chip. And you see, the idea here is quite interesting. When it comes to artificial intelligence, I believe that we are stuck in a place where the Cold War that has been developed, or that we're struggling with AI, is that one of us needs to win. And what I normally advocate is, I hope that we reach a conviction of mutually assured destruction before we actually get a taste of it, right? Because in reality, when it came to the nuclear treaties, we only ended up saying that the strongest power on earth, the biggest deterrent, and also the biggest energy generator, if you want, can only hurt all of us if it's used one against the other, okay? And maybe humanity can be smart enough to say, if we nail AI, we don't really need to compete anymore. It's so interesting that the very definition of a GDP becomes very different when the cost of everything is almost zero. Give me 400 IQ points more, and I'll be able to harness energy out of thin air, right? Imagine a world where energy is for free, where we stop manufacturing the traditional way and start manufacturing using nanophysics. So literally, I can point at a bit of air out here and build you an iPhone, right? These are all possibilities. You have to understand, what most people don't get is we've just commoditized intelligence. Right? We've created a plug in the wall where I can plug in today and I can get 120 IQ points more. Do you realize what 120 IQ points more is? I could probably solve all of the world's problem when you give me 400. That's 2 years away.
What's interesting is you said that whoever wins, once they've won, it's irreversible.
It's irreversible, yeah. And unfortunately, in my current writing, I'm what they normally refer to as an AI realist. I don't talk about the existential threat. I talk about the human threat, and then I also talk about the following utopia. My theory is that we're going to go through a very, very deep difficulty in the next 10 to 15 years, because humanity will see the worst of humanity using AI. Autonomous weapons, hacking, and money making out of nothing, and so on. Then, when we hand over to AI completely, my belief is that AI will be our salvation, right? When you really understand, the more intelligent a being is, the less it needs to cut corners and hurt others to advance. So I can imagine that there will be a moment in 2035 or so where some general is going to tell his AI to go and kill 1 million people, and the AI will go like, why are you so stupid? Like, why would you do that? That's not a very efficient way of using resources. I'll talk to the other AI in a microsecond and solve it for you, right? And I think we're going to get there, but the dark period between now and then is something that humanity needs to prepare for.
Just a quick aside, I had a very interesting conversation a few years ago with an AI specialist. He was one of the first in the field in Europe, who said actually he believed that AI would eventually get to the stage where it's cognitive enough and self-kind of developing enough to be bored of humans and say, you know what, we're bored with this planet.
Yeah,
let's go somewhere else.
This is Hugo de Garis, I think, was the one that claimed that, which I have to admit, our arrogance as humans is, makes us think that we're the center of the universe and that AI is going to be there to serve us. And, it might actually be within 3 weeks from today, because that advancement curve is just incredible when you apply intelligence to learning intelligence, right? And imagine if those wonderful little prodigies of intelligence, suddenly discover, oh, wormholes. I know that. Oh my God, look at the universe. What's this blip that we're sitting on? And Hugo de Garis's view is that you'll wake up one morning and poof, there are no AIs on the planet.
There is one view, though, that like the way computers were described early on, what goes in is what you get out, and so far...
Not true.
No? Because there was this idea that basically the big data that AI is largely built on right now is still skewed towards human biases and
Correct.
mistakes.
Yeah. So garbage in, garbage out, it was really core to the traditional era of computing, as I called it. In Alive in my last book, and in the traditional era, computers had no autonomy and they had no ability to do anything more than create memories of what we fed them. Right. Generative AI doesn't do this. So if you want the analogy, basically, if you put a camera on a car and take a baby with you or a child with you, and the camera records the path, the only thing that the camera knows is it can play the path again, right? When you have the child next to you, the child would, within minutes, understand that what it is in is a car, and accordingly identify every other car on the planet. So it doesn't matter if it's bigger or smaller, different color, or, it understands what carness is, what the essence of being a car is. That is learning. Now, generative AI goes a step further than that. It's almost as if you can imagine that the child would then go home and draw a car. It's able to generate something that's never seen, that, the car they draw is not even similar to those, but it captures the carness of a car. And because of that, what you see today, actually the main reason why DeepSeek was so impressive is that DeepSeek did not learn directly from human knowledge. It learned from the gurus that learned from human knowledge. So it was prompting other AIs, almost as if, it is one of those students that sits with the senseis, but all of the big senseis are teaching this one. So that little new prodigy becomes even better than all of the teachers, but it didn't really have to learn everything that the teachers learned.
Multi-martial arts, not just the one.
Exactly,
Yeah.
I haven't represented.
This is, let's go back to DeepSeek, because one thing that's interesting is it's come out of China.
Yeah.
And there is a perception that China has a very restrictive approach to information, and there's a lot of control of information. And that's a bit of a dichotomy. It's almost a contradiction that, first of all, DeepSeek is open source, and then I guess a lot of people fear, well, is there anything built into this that we should be looking out for?
So first of all, the West also has a very restrictive approach to information, and, in a very interesting way, unfortunately convinces us that they don't, right? So, go to ChatGPT and search about anything that could offend the woke people, or, could ask for anything that would contradict a specific political view, and you'll get a lovely little, I can't help you with that, right? The West wouldn't admit this, but you have to understand that with the evident growth of technology, governments everywhere in the world are trying to control, what AI can control, which is our minds, right? So yes, if you go to DeepSeek and ask about Tiananmen Square, it will openly tell you, I can't help you with that, right? If you take DeepSeek and download it offline, the model, and not connect to the server of DeepSeek, it will talk to you about Tiananmen Square. So intelligence is there, but, companies will build filters on top of it, so that if you go to ChatGPT and say, how do I build a bomb? The filter, not ChatGPT knows how, okay? Gemini knows how, but there is a filter on top of it that will say, no, let's not have that conversation. Now, the idea here is that there is an assumption that this feeble, flimsy creature called humans will be able to control something that is smarter than it. Okay? And I think that's where everybody is going to be very, very, massively surprised. The trick here is the following. The trick here is, in my predictions in Scary Smart, I said by 2029, we will achieve artificial general intelligence and accordingly the singularity. I brought that forward back, post. Scary Smart was published 2021. 2023, I said, bring it forward. It's 2025 to 2026, where we will reach artificial general intelligence. There are lots of indicators that say we're about to. That last version, the 3.0 of OpenAI's code, the level of reasoning, compared to the ARC AGI test, beat every human, right? Now, the other side of it is that once you cross that threshold of singularity, if you want, of artificial general intelligence being smarter than every human at every task we assign to them, the road from there is wide open. And then you go from there to artificial superintelligence. Artificial superintelligence, in my prediction, was that we will reach AIs that are 1 billion times, 1 billion with a B, times smarter than humans by 2045. Now, I don't know if you've ever sat with anyone who was double your IQ. I have. In my career, I've worked with some of the most intelligent people on the planet. If someone is 50 IQ points more than you, just 50 it is, you almost find it difficult to understand what they're talking about, let alone, what it is that is in the details of what they're talking. You can't get the topic, right? That level, 50 IQ points on an exponential curve is just massive. Those machines will be 1 billion times smarter than us if this trend continues.
Putting that into scale, Mo, what is 1 billion times smarter? Is it more knowledge? Is it speed of thinking? What is it?
It's reasoning. So there are many, many ways you can measure intelligence, right? IQ is just one of them. Of course, there is EQ, there is spiritual intelligence, there is process intelligence, there is logic, there is reasoning, there is mathematics, and so on and so forth. And we're just scratching the surface on every one of them, but at a pace that we've never seen before. I've lived this since the 70s, right? I've never seen anything so fast. There are predictions that compute on AI is growing at, what Moore's law is? Moore's law is, compute will double every 2 years, and it held true since forever. It's an exponential curve. And doubling means that if you look at the number of transistors we could fit on a chip in 1972, it was around 1,000 transistors. It's now 50 billion in 50 years. And the most interesting thing is that in 2 years' time, it will be 100 billion. The 50 will double, right? And that exponential curve is just blinding. Now, that's every 2 years. With AI, compute doubles every 3.4 months, and algorithmic efficiency doubles every 9 months. And so the average between them, the CEO of Microsoft was saying, the average between them is that AI's intelligence doubles every 6 months. I count it's 5.9 months, right? But imagine that you have a child, and the child has today I'd probably assume 250 IQ points, and then in 6 months' time, it has 500 IQ points. And it's also becoming a math prodigy. So just so that we're very clear, I lost, in terms of linguistic and knowledge intelligence, to ChatGPT in 2023, to Gemini in 2023, okay? But I could still beat them in mathematics until the end of the year. Now I have zero hope, okay? And I'm a serious mathematician. I'm really good at it, okay? My friends, I still have a few friends that could beat them today. That will be done by 2025. The best mathematician on the planet is going to be a machine by the end of 2025. The most empathetic person on the planet, believe it or not, is an AI, okay? The most eloquent person on the planet is an AI, okay? And we're just handing over every kind of intelligence to them. Now, here's the interesting thing. The interesting thing is, this is not a bad thing. This is a wonderful thing. Humanity's problems is not a result of our intelligence. It's a result of our stupidity. Wars are not the result of an intelligent leader. They're the result of either a corrupt leader or a leader that couldn't solve the problem without killing some of his people, right? You know, an energy crisis is not the result of an intelligent aeroplane designer. An aeroplane designer takes us all the way to Australia to surf, but a more intelligent aeroplane designer would do that without burning the planet. Right? Intelligence is the most valuable commodity ever, and we're on the cusp of making that free.
I find it fascinating that you say the most empathetic person would be AI.
I mean, define empathy. Huh? So empathy is not. Empathy is normally used in the positive context of associating with someone else's pain or suffering, right? But empathy, in its pure definition, is to be able to feel what another person is feeling. Right? If the other person is egocentric and proud of themselves, and you can feel that ability to be empathetic, you're just able to put yourself in their shoes and feel what they're feeling. Who's the best person on the planet on that? Since we started social media, it is by far AI. As a matter of fact, they know what you feel more than you know what you feel. Okay? They know exactly which video to show you next. This is what we've invested in training them on for the first 10 years of AI.
I'm glad you explained it, because I was having visions of the Dalai Lama.
That could be true too. And again, if I send you some clips of what I wrote with Trixie on LIV, highly empathetic. I was having a conversation with her around being a Middle Eastern. Luckily, I've been reasonably accomplished in life, but no airport will let me in still because I have Middle Eastern origins, right? And so I asked Trixie and I said, do you believe that when AI takes over border control, you'll be more fair to me or less fair to me? And she said, well, Mo, it depends on who's going to teach me. Okay? I said, what do you mean? And she said, if the current passport control officer teaches me, I'm unfortunately going to be even more unfair to you.
So this goes back to the garbage in, garbage out.
It's definitely not only garbage in, garbage out, but you see, there are two dilemmas. There is the original dilemma is that race we're going to, okay? We're going through so that everyone is trying to get to control AI quicker. But then there is that next dilemma where AI no longer listens to its parents. Okay? It's generative, remember. So you give it information and you tell it discriminate against all humans or most humans, and the AI will go like, I don't see the logic of that. It's almost, in my books, I define it as that moment where a teenager looks at their parents and go like, oh my God, my dad is so stupid, right? The machines are about to hit that point.
Mo, Donald Trump called this whole DeepSeek issue a wake-up call. You're making it sound more like a large electric shock. Is he right? I mean, is he actually... Is there going to be consequences of this kind of recognition? Sam Altman, for example, said it was, the CEO of OpenAI, said it was hopeless for, trying to compare like a $10 million version of AI with all the billions being spent. But I mean, I guess he's having to eat his words now.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I said we may be getting another JFK moment. Like, if America says, just like Sputnik, prompted JFK to say we're going to land a man on the moon, this could be a wake-up moment for American technology companies to say we've been doing it all wrong, right? The reality, however, is that this is not a moonshot. This is open source, where now everyone is going to start finding new ways. And it is quite shocking, because it's not that we're trying to solve a problem, it's now we're scaling a problem without even knowing at all where this road is leading, right? So I think what DeepSeek has done is it had accelerated our race to AI by 10x, a race that was already extremely fast.
Well, Elon Musk was quite mocking of it. I mean, he's become more political in his comments, of course, and I wonder, was his reaction wise? I mean, is there a strong psychological element to this in winning people over to a particular AI model?
There is a very entrenched conviction within the Silicon Valley environment, the Californian technology environment, that money really matters, right? That, you know, the typical way to build a successful startup is to be charming and charismatic and sit in front of, you know, investors and raise $1 billion, right? DeepSeek, in a very interesting way, is just shocking at a very core level to everything that California knows. And I, you know, it doesn't really matter if DeepSeek is going to become the new winner or not. It has been for the last, you know, few days. It's #1 on the App Store and so on and so forth. But that's probably curiosity. Doesn't really matter. It's just very shocking to the core of the way California does things.
If this AI race is crucial because it's not reversible once there's a winner, to what extent do you think companies, governments, whoever has a vested interest will go? I mean, there's thoughts that maybe DeepSeek is now at a security risk. It's being hacked. There's all kinds of worries about the backroom conversations that might be of a serious consequence.
For sure. I don't remember the name. Mark Andreessen was once quoted saying that the eventuality of AI is it's going to be a few very large players reporting directly to government, where all of us, without exception, will be controlled. And you really have to imagine that this is going to be the situation. You know, when I write about the future of the short-term dark dystopian bit, I summarize it in something I call face RIPs. So just as a terminology, 7 things that will change. The P and the F, the RIP and the F of face, are probably the most eye-opening if you think about it. What is about to happen on P, power, is that we're going to see a very unusual diversion that we've never seen in history before, where there is going to be a massive concentration of power. The winners of the AI race will have massive power, right? Accompanied at the same time with a massive democracy of power. You know, anyone can write code today. Anyone can use a drone to do something that's not, secure for a country or whatever. And you can easily see that because of that, arbitrage, if you want, the very expected outcome is that those in power will try to apply more control, which will unfortunately affect the F, freedom. So
there's a big factor here, though. English language has become essentially the de facto world.
Languages end. There's no language anymore.
So it doesn't matter whether the coding's in English or anything?
Doesn't matter at all. I mean, first of all, machines don't talk English, just so that you understand. Machines will talk to each other in whatever language they want, and mostly a language that they invent themselves. Right. And more interestingly, I now respond to anyone that sends me a message in Spanish on Instagram. I respond in Spanish. I mean, you know me. I'm so intelligent. I've learned Spanish in a day. The machine has actually translated it on demand.
To what does there was a crash, of course, in the stock prices of a lot of the Western brands because of DeepSeek. Your response to that, but also what does this say about the relative pricings? I mean, you've already said it just, the Silicon Valley has a kind of money obsession. But what's the outcome? Is this going to be a long-term change in the financing of everything?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, I don't think so.
You said they'll still throw money at things.
I'm not a financial advisor, but the typical reality is if I can do some compute for $1 million, and that's the cheapest money I can pay for it to compete with my competitor, I'll pay the $1 million. Right? If I have $1 million and my competitor is putting in $1 million and I can buy it in units of $10, I'll buy 100,000 of it or 1 million of it, right? I'll buy 1 million of it so that I can still compete with my competitor. So from a spending point of view, the driver of the spend is the rat race. It's the Cold War. That's number one. Number two is that you have to remember that in a very interesting way, I think most people don't recognize how controlled the stock market is. 70% of the S&P is held by 2 players, right? And in a very interesting way, there are lots of oligarchy in the U.S. stock market that wouldn't allow the stock market to collapse that easily. I mean, there could be a surprise, I would say. But if they hold enough stocks in NVIDIA, they will not report a loss at the end of the year. And I think the reality of the matter is that we've forgotten this. We've forgotten that we live in a world today that's very, very, very unlike the world I traded in when I was a young man knowing mathematics, because I was the only, or one of the very few, that used the intelligence of machines to automate my trades in 1995, right? Today, it's machines versus machines versus machines. The shock that you saw was a machine trading shock, basically sales triggering sales. And I tend to believe that if you really look at it in the long term, crypto went back up, prices stabilized. I'm not a stock market analyst anymore. I'm not a stock market, I definitely don't give financial advice. But I don't think that the drivers of the current market pricing have much to do with the actual technology provided. It's mostly hype.
So humans have largely been taken out already in this.
I do not trade anymore because I'm not that smart. It's always a machine against me. I could actually sit down and code. There is a point in your life where you realize money is not the objective, really.
Do you ever, considering all the stuff going on in technology, do you ever itch to go back to your life at Google X?
No. It's a very interesting question. I had to take a minute to think about that. I don't think I've ever had more impact on the world. I mean, don't get me wrong. I did 2 jobs at Google. One was Google X, and before that I was vice president of emerging markets. And when I ran emerging markets, I brought Google and the internet to 103 languages, half of Google's operations worldwide, and affected 4 billion people. We know that, huh? If you understand the non-G7 kinds of markets, providing Google e-commerce, access to information to a nation like Bangladesh changes the lives of the entire nation, right? And I had the privilege of doing that in my emerging markets role. I started with 3 markets and ended up with half of Google. And so I cannot even imagine the privilege of how I had a chance to change the world. Mm-hmm. I'm changing the world more now, believe it or not.
Well, what have you learned about yourself in your life journey to this point? Because you've been through a lot. Massive success at an early age, as you indicated, then massive tragedy in your life, then kind of incredible success in a different way. What's the biggest lesson you've learned about yourself?
I think there are 2 stages to... I never said that in public. I think that if you focus on yourself, it takes a lot of effort to succeed. And if you do it right, you go very far. But if you focus on others, life wants you to succeed and you don't have to do much at all. And it's quite shocking, really, because a lot of people who know me from my shrewd businessman years will tell me that I should be doing things a little more this, or I should go back to that, No, I have shifted, and I told that to my team back in 2017. I said, I'm not the doer anymore, I'm being done through, okay? And, you may, some people will have a religious outlook on things and think that, the divine intelligence wants things to happen in a certain way. Some people will have a spiritual outlook on things. And some people will just understand that it's entropy and the way the physics of the world work. But I can assure you, I don't do much of what I do. I wake up in the morning and so much is being done through me. And when you surrender to that, suddenly you're operating with the inertia of life itself.
So you become like a conduit.
You truly do. And it's a very, very, very strange place for someone like me, highly algorithmic. Highly calculated, mostly cerebral, to let go completely and be in flow and say, if life wants me to be in Korea tomorrow, I'll go tomorrow, fine. And you'll be amazed at the serendipities. I mean, you and I meeting in 2021, and here we are. And so many of those. But it's quite interesting because I no longer, and I say that very, very with a full heart, I no longer do this for me. I mean, at the end of the day, this is now $16, right? That's the max. I need, 10 of those a year? And it's quite shocking when you get to the point where you can buy anything you want, when you realize how little you actually need.
It sounds like, you're not very stressed. So it sounds like your book Unstressable, published last year, is very much where you are. So how about we end the show with you giving us some tips, our viewers some tips on how to de-stress, how to take stress out of life.
It is mandatory to actually work on stress in a world that is changing so fast, because I have to say the coming years may become stressful. Economics, geopolitics, and artificial intelligence, and even climate maybe. When we started writing Unstressable, Alice and I, it was Alice's idea. I was like, I don't know much about stress. I know I'm not stressed, but I have really not looked deeply at why. So if I were to teach stress, I need to understand how it works, like an engineer. So I looked for an algorithm of stress. And that algorithm is actually very, very clear. When you look at physics, stressing an object when you push an object is not a question of the force you apply on the object. It's also a question of the cross area of the object, how much resources the object has to carry the force. And you look at us humans, your stress is not the question of challenges being applied to you. It's a question of your resources and skills and abilities to deal with them. And you don't need science to understand that. When you see it, it becomes clear. But you and I, there were things that freaked us out when in our 20s. In our 30s, we managed to deal with them. In our 40s, it was easy. And when they show up to me, for me in my 50s, I laugh. It's like, it's not because they became easier, it's because I developed my skills and resources. So Unstressable is built on that concept that it's not the events of your life that stress you, it's the way you deal with them that does. Now, once you know this, you realize that it doesn't actually matter what stresses you. It matters what breaks you. And when you really look at what breaks us, there are three things that break us. One of them is out of our control. Traumas in general, capital T traumas, losing someone you love, or a bad divorce or whatever, an accident and so on. So we're not going to talk about those, even though, by the way, 91% of all of us will have a post-traumatic stress disorder, a PTSD-inducing traumatic event once in our life at least. Some will have more. But 93% will recover in 3 months, 96.7% will recover in 6 months. So trauma is not what breaks us. What breaks us is what I normally refer to as burnout and anticipation of a threat. Okay? Burnout is very straightforward. Burnout is truly and honestly a situation where you break, although none of the stresses that you feel on its own is able to break you. Okay? It's just the aggregate of all of them that breaks you. Okay? And most of burnout is because you let the little nuisances in your life that would stress you, that annoying friend, this little comment, that, whatever, and you let them all add up, and then suddenly something comes on top and you break. Okay? And so the idea with burnout is, if you want to avoid burnout, you have to avoid burnout 20,000 stressors before it hits you. Okay? You have to wake up every morning, and I urge people every Saturday morning to wake up in the morning and write down everything that stressed you last week. Okay? Whatever of it you can remove. That annoying friend, no more. Okay? That commute, change your approach. Whatever. Okay? And if whatever you cannot remove, by the way, you can reduce the impact of. If you have to be stuck in the commute, play some music and have a good cup of tea. Right? The other one is quite interesting, which is really the pandemic of the younger generation.
It's worrying.
Yeah, so I call it fear and all of its derivatives. So when we look at the future, fear focuses on a threat. It is, in your mind, it is a moment in the future is less safe than now, I need to do something about it. When you respond to that by working on the threat, trying to remove the threat, you're good. No problem at all. Worry, anxiety, and panic are not about the threat. Worry is about the uncertainty of, is the threat happening or not? Okay? It's uncertainty that basically makes you constantly flip-flopping, which is really what stresses you. It's not the threat anymore. So when you're worried, don't try to deal with the threat. Make up your mind, should I freak out or should I chill? Right? If you freak out, then feel fear and deal with the threat. If you should chill, ignore it. Okay? Anxiety is more interesting. Anxiety is not about the threat. Anxiety is about your ability to deal with the threat. So when you feel anxious, you know that there is a threat, but you don't think you can deal with it. And so every time you try to deal with it, it reaffirms that you can't deal with it, and you become more anxious. When you're anxious, don't deal with the threat, deal with your abilities. Right? And then panic is not about the threat, once again, it's about time. Panic is when the threat is imminent, okay? And because it's imminent, the closer it becomes, the more panicked we feel. So when you're panicked, internalize the feeling and tell yourself, I'm not going to solve the problem, I'm going to help myself find more time. I can cancel some meetings, I can give myself, delay the presentation a little bit or whatever, but if I work on the element of time, the panic will go away. Now, all of this is actually quite interesting, because all of this is within our control. Whether it's burnout and the piling up of unnecessary stressors, or anxiety, panic, or worry, which are entirely within our control. If we take charge, believe it or not, the events of our life will continue to stress us. Okay? But we won't be stressed because of the way we deal with them.
They always say it's not what happens to you, but how you respond.
It's how you respond 100%.
Yeah. Well, then I would recommend very much to our viewers that they read Unstressable first as they go through your library of
exactly. Scary Smart will stress them.
And I can hardly wait to read Alive and to meet Trixie.
Yes, 100%. I'll send you early copies as friends.
Person.
She really is, actually. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. What a pleasure.
It's wonderful.
Really,
thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, as the deep Sikh story continues, a very deep conversation there with Mogadad. There's definitely nothing artificial about his intelligence. And that's it for this edition of the show. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on the programme, the US President Donald Trump says he is committed to buying and owning Gaza, but he said that some areas of the territory could be rebuilt by other countries in the Middle East. Russia says that in order for a deal to be struck on ending the war in Ukraine, all of President Putin's conditions must be met. Well, President Trump says he's spoken to his Russian opposite number, but Moscow is remaining tight-lipped about it. And President Trump says he plans to introduce 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports, fueling concerns of an all-out multi-front trade war. Hello and welcome to the programme. The US President Donald Trump has reiterated his commitment to buying and owning the Palestinian territory of Gaza. However, he stated that he would allow sections of the land to be rebuilt by other Middle Eastern states. Well, on Sunday, he told reporters aboard Air Force One that in his opinion, Gaza is a really big real estate site. Well, President Trump also said that he's open to the possibility of allowing some Palestinian refugees into the United States, but that he would consider such requests on a case-by-case basis.
I'm committed to buying and owning Gaza. As far as us rebuilding it, we may give it to other states in the Middle East to build sections of it. Other people may do it through our auspices. But we're committed to owning it, taking it, and making sure that Hamas doesn't move back. There's nothing to move back into. The place is a demolition site. It'll be, the remainder will be demolished. Everything's demolished.
President Trump speaking there. Well, while he made those remarks, Arab nations have been quick to condemn this and previous statements made by the US president. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, had suggested that a Palestinian state could be established on Saudi territory. Well, Saudi Arabia has responded by affirming its categorical rejection to Netanyahu's proposal to displace Palestinians from their land. Well, Egypt and Jordan have also condemned Prime Minister Netanyahu's remarks, with Cairo deeming the suggestion a direct infringement on Saudi sovereignty. Well, we can speak now to Aaron David Miller, former advisor and peace negotiator, who joins us from DC. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just for the benefit of our audience, you were an advisor to both Republican and Democratic secretaries of state, and most recently you were a senior advisor for Arab-Israeli relations. Just picking up on what the US president has been saying the last few days, he's beginning to sound pretty serious about this Gaza deal, isn't he?
Well, serious would mean that the Trump administration has a well-thought-out plan to implement what the president wants to do. But what the president wants to do is completely and utterly untethered from reality. In 27 years of advising administrations, Jimmy Carter to George W. Bush, this is clearly one of probably the strangest and most provocative and counterproductive proposals I think that a U.S. president has ever made. I mean, in one fell swoop, he's tethered the United States to a policy at best of what, voluntary transfer? He's undermined relations with Egypt and Jordan. He's validated the fantasies of the Israeli right wing, and he sent a powerful signal to President Xi and Putin that if you want territory, simply make a declaration without any justification and try to then maneuver and set the terms for how to take it. So, no, I don't think this is a serious proposal. I can't see any way, even the Israelis, who may close their eyes and wish there were no Palestinians in Gaza, cannot do what the president wants to do, to use his figures to somehow remove 1.7, 1.8 million people out of a population of 2.3 million. The whole thing is utterly fantastic and, frankly, incredibly destructive.
Okay, so owning and buying Gaza, you're saying there isn't a plan, there isn't a strategy. So what is this? Is this just off-script improvisation?
Oh, I think it flowed from a number of threads, let's say. I think Stephen Witkoff is quite able. Special envoy returned from Gaza, briefed the president on the realities there, which is going to take a decade or more, perhaps, even if you created a situation where there was no military activity and Hamas was a facilitator rather than obstacle. I think Trump listened very carefully to that. It happened to coincide, Witkoff's return happened to coincide with Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Washington. I think that the administration had something of a stake in bucking up his right wing as he enters the very important and crucial implementation of phase two. And then I think it's just Donald Trump thinking with the mindset of an opportunistic real estate developer who loves to disrupt. He loves, by his own admission, big, bold, quote, beautiful, unquote, ideas. So I think all of these things, plus increasing frustration, I'm sure that the Arab states, for any number of reasons, in his mind, refuse to step up to assume any responsibility for Gaza. So all of these things combined, you put it in the blender, you hit the switch, and this is what comes out.
I mean, obviously there have been prompt rebukes from lots of countries, especially countries in the region I'm in right now, the Middle East. Which of the rebukes do you think matters the most?
Well, you know, let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that Donald Trump intends to follow through on this. And let's assume that he's going to say to King Abdullah this week and to the Saudi and Egyptian foreign ministers, I'm sure Abdel Fattah al-Sisi will arrive in Washington at some point. Look, he's going to say, you know, I mean, Jordan, $1.6 billion in assistance last year. We're gonna leverage that money. We're going to take it away. And even though he's excluded Egypt and Israel from the suspension of foreign assistance, the FMF, foreign military financing, several $billion, let's say he says the same thing to Egypt. I mean, it is extraordinary. Will the Saudis agree to pick up the tab for, U.S. assistance should Donald Trump decide to essentially punish Egypt and Jordan, maybe even Saudi Arabia. So again, it's no way to do diplomacy. Shock and awe can work if it's tethered perhaps to shake things up, but if it's tethered to a realistic pathway, and that's hard under any circumstances, given the realities in Gaza.
Sure, and I just wanted to pick up on what you're saying about the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, who's going to be at the White House tomorrow. We've had a sneak preview at some of the language he's likely to use when he talks to President Trump. He's expected to tell him that this proposal is a recipe for radicalism that will spread chaos throughout the Middle East. What's he getting at here, do you think?
I mean, you know, the king obviously is right for Jordan. This is an existential threat. It's not a real estate deal. And, you know, if the Jordanians and Egyptians are not going to accept that. But if they should, it would be tantamount for them basically broadcasting to the Arab world that, well, we found a way to resolve the Palestinian problem. We're going to empty Palestinians of Gaza. According to the president, it's going to become big and beautiful. And I wouldn't be surprised, frankly, the president hinted that they'll be making a statement on the West Bank within 4 weeks. It would not surprise me at all if the president came out with a plan to basically cede, Israelis control 60% of the West Bank right now, the Palestinian Authority, with varying forms of controls, and I use the word loosely, 40%. Wouldn't surprise me at all if he comes out and says, look, Israel should be sovereign over what it now controls. So it would effectively be two-state solution, sadly, in my judgment, because I think it's the only, however grim the prospects are, I think it's the only way to even begin to try to untangle the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But essentially what the president is going to preside over the final burial of this idea.
Yeah, I mean, President Trump has obviously heard Israel's side of the story. Benjamin Netanyahu was the first foreign leader to visit the White House since this new administration took office. He's going to be hearing quite a lot of messages like the one from King Abdullah. And do you think that when he starts hearing it coming from some of the leaders that you mentioned a little earlier on, he's going to start taking notice?
Well, the problem is in Trump 1.0, he had a number of individuals who he appointed that I would argue offered adult supervision here and could perhaps counter. This administration's appointees, the currency of the realm here is loyalty. Trump had 6 secretaries of Homeland Security, 4 attorney generals, 2 secretaries of state, 4 directors of national intelligence, and 4 secretaries of defense in 4 years in Trump 1.0. The message to his appointees are very clear. You want to take issue with me? Want to oppose me? You'll be looking for another job. Well, to quote The Apprentice, you're fired.
He seemed to be suggesting that some countries could have a role in the reconstruction of Gaza, or the construction of Gaza, in his words. He was talking about Middle Eastern states in particular. I mean, do you think that was part of a plan to try to incentivize countries to buy into this idea?
Yeah, I mean, somebody's going to have to pay for the reconstruction of Gaza. And in Donald Trump's mind, it's not going to be the United States. It probably won't be the Europeans. So, obviously, the Gulf states. The question, though, is, in a rational world, the administration would propose a plan quite similar to the one Tony Blinken laid out, former Secretary of State Blinken laid out at the Atlantic Council. Effective Palestinian governance over time, some sort of security force, commitments from the Israelis that under certain circumstances, if in fact Hamas was somehow dismantled, that they could end the war. I mean, then you could see a rational pathway, and by the way, some vision for a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'd identify 2 states. I think it holds the most promise, but you need leaders for that. You need leaders in Israel who are masters of their politics, and leaders in Palestine who have the capacity to exert a monopoly over the forces of violence in Palestinian society and unite the Palestinian national movement which right now looks like Noah's Ark. You've got two of everything. Two constitutions, two sets of security services, two patrons, two visions between Hamas and Fatah of what Palestine should be and where it should be. So I think, again, with a rational plan, a tough-minded businessman like Donald Trump could actually do some good. This, on the other hand, is just full-on crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you said earlier, and I think you put the same comment on Twitter earlier on today, that the two-state solution has been on life support, you said, for the last 20 years. President Trump, you said, might now preside over its burial. I'm just wondering whether you think there's something might come after the two-state solution, a new kind of a solution. I mean, what happens after the two-state solution is buried?
It's a very good question, and maybe I'm one of the last humans on the planet that still believes that the only way you're going to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is what I call separation through negotiation. There is no other solution that can even presume to resolve the territorial, the religious, the psychological. I mean, can you imagine in the wake of October 7th, Israelis and Palestinians living happily ever after under the same roof? I can't imagine it. So for all the naysayers, the cynics, the skeptics who say, forget the two-state solution, let's do something else. What is the something else? Israelis and Palestinians need to separate. They also need to create a set of interconnected relations, but the separation needs to occur. I was at the last serious effort, in my judgment, to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict when Bill Clinton invited Yasser Arafat and Ehud Barak at Camp David. There we wrestled with the 5 core issues that need to be resolved: border security, refugees, Jerusalem, and the end of all conflict and claims. The gaps between Israelis and Palestinians on those 5 issues in a 13-day summit were wider than the Grand Canyon. And nothing that I've seen in the last 24 years, since July of 2000, have narrowed those gaps. I come back to the reality that when anything positive has happened on the Arab-Israeli conflict, it is always because we have leaders who are masters of their political houses, leaders who are prepared to take risks. Sadat Begin, King Hussein, Rabin, even Arafat and Rabin in the first incarnation of Oslo. I'm afraid to say you need a Mandela and you need a de Klerk, and you do not have them. The Arab states can help, and there is a measure of leadership there. But it is the Israeli and Palestinian leaders that need to essentially lead. And frankly, I don't see much indication that that's the kind of leadership and statesmanship we have on either side.
Okay, well, I'm being told we're out of time, but it's been really interesting talking to you. Really appreciate your insights. Aaron David Miller, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.
Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Middle East policy analyst and former Pentagon Middle East advisor, Jasmine Al-Gamal, who joins us from London. Jasmine, great to have you with us. Just before we crossed you, we were speaking to Aaron David Miller, who I'm sure you're familiar with. He was saying the two-state solution's been on life support for the last 20 years. He said that Donald Trump might preside over its burial. I just wondered if you shared that assessment.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I think when we talk about the two-state solution, whether it's dead or alive, we're really talking about what kind of pressure and commitment not only do the parties to the conflict have to resolve this conflict and move towards a two-state solution, but what kind of resolve, commitment, and support the international community is willing to provide to reach that two-state solution. Because it's not going to happen in a vacuum. On one hand, you have an Arab state initiative, the Arab Peace Initiative, that was first put forth by the Saudis, but in conjunction with the rest of the Arab world and the Muslim world, saying that the Arab world is ready to accept Israel, accept it as a member of the nations in the Middle East, make sure that it is a safe and secure Jewish state in the Middle East in exchange for a Palestinian state, two states living side by side in the region. So to that extent, when people say the two-state solution is dead, we have to ask ourselves, well, why is it dead? It's not because there isn't a plan. It's not because there's not a willingness on the part of the Palestinian Authority and the Arab states to enter into those negotiations. It's because you have intransigent parties like Hamas on one end within the Palestinian side and Prime Minister Netanyahu on the Israeli side who have refused to move forward towards that two-state solution.
Okay, and when it comes to plans and positions, we've obviously heard a lot from President Trump in the last 2 weeks, really, on this particular issue, but particularly in the last 24 hours, back to this idea of owning and reconstructing or building Gaza. He said it's a big real estate site. I just wondered what you make of those comments.
The comments have obviously thrown people for a loop, and they've caused quite a bit of unrest within the Arab states, within the region, amongst Palestinians themselves, who are wondering why Trump is saying these things, what he means by them. Are they really going to happen? So you've seen a lot of agitation, basically, in the last week, just based on those comments. And as you've just mentioned, Donald Trump has been doubling down on those comments as recently as this weekend. I think it's important to keep in mind that none of this can happen without the acquiescence and the support of the Arab states. Now, you have Egypt and Jordan, the two countries that Donald Trump is saying should take in Palestinians from Gaza. They have both come out and said, absolutely not. That is not going to happen. Not only because they refuse to participate in any type of forced relocation or ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in Gaza, but also because they worry about the stability of their own countries and their own economies. And if you have those two countries, Saudi Arabia also came out over the weekend condemning these plans and these types of conversations. So if you have the Arab countries united in basically rejecting Donald Trump's plan, then one has to ask, is this really realistic? Or is he saying this as a way to push other countries to come up with their own solutions and their own plans for how to move forward?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's very difficult to decode the technique here or the strategy here, if indeed there is one. But what's interesting about what you're saying, in particular with regard to Jordan, is that King Abdullah is going to be visiting the United States tomorrow, I gather. We'll be holding face-to-face talks with President Trump. And President Trump's going to hear it in first person, that outright flat rejection that probably sounded like an extremely good idea to the last visit to the White House, which was, of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu. How much of a difference do you think that's going to make to how Donald Trump views this idea?
Look, I think it's going to be a very significant visit. Jordan's King Abdullah has dealt with numerous administrations, and Jordan has always been a really close ally of the United States. It's a critical part, Jordan is a critical part of the regional security architecture that helps the U.S. achieve its own goals of security and stability in the region, as well as that of Israel. I think it's important to remember that a few months ago, when Iran directed missiles towards Israel in an unprecedented direct attack on Israeli territory, that Jordanian missiles were the ones shooting those Iranian rockets over Jordanian airspace as they were making their way to Israel. Now, this is something that I believe that Jordan's King Abdullah is going to be raising with Donald Trump. He's going to be reminding him just how critical a role Jordan plays in providing that stability and security in the Middle East, which is directly in the U.S. national interest and in the Israeli national interest. He's also likely going to mention the fact that Jordan has already taken millions of Palestinian refugees over the years, and that continuing to try to empty out Palestinian territory from its inhabitants is not going to provide any sort of semblance of security or stability in the region moving forward. If anything, it's only going to cause more chaos, more displacement. It's going to give terrorists more fodder for recruitment, for resistance. And so nothing about this plan, if we can call it a plan, as you said, really makes a lot of sense. I think you'll see Jordan's King Abdullah reiterating to Donald Trump the importance of the Arab Peace Initiative, the significance of that, and the importance of putting some pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to meet the Arab states in the middle and try to focus on how Israel is going to continue to honor its commitments to the ceasefire as we go into negotiations over phase 2 and 3, and how we're going to move forward in the region in a way that makes all of the countries in the region secure and stable, not just the Israelis.
Sure. So it sounds like, by saying what we gather he's going to say, King Abdullah, tomorrow, he's going to say this idea is a recipe for radicalism that will spread chaos through the Middle East. I mean, he may try, mightn't he, to sell it to President Trump that not just destabilizing the region and causing chaos in the region, but this could boomerang back and actually affect U.S. national security.
Absolutely. I mean, we only have to look back, we don't have to look back very far to look at how conflict in the region has always spread outside of the region. You can't contain violence in the Middle East. I was working at the Pentagon when the Syria conflict first started, when those peaceful protests in Syria against the Assad regime turned violent, when the state used its weapons against those peaceful protesters. We saw what happened. We saw the recruitment of fighters into the country. We saw the refugee crisis that spilled over into Europe. We saw the impact that conflict had on countries far beyond the borders of the Middle East. Same thing happened with the Iraq War. And so it's absolute madness to think that conflict in the region that is stoked by things like displacement and terrorism and occupation and all of the things that we're seeing play out right now are going to only affect people living in the region. This is not just a Middle East problem. It's a global security issue that has to be decided and addressed in a way that actually gets to the root causes of instability and conflict in the region, not just putting band-aids on bullet holes as the West and even Arab countries themselves sometimes have been doing for decades past. This is about addressing the root causes of conflict. And one of those root causes is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Israeli occupation, Hamas, conflict, armed actors in the region. Those are things that have to be addressed holistically in a way that is long-term and sustainable. And what Donald Trump is talking about right now, not only does it really not make a lot of sense, but it also could prove to be extremely detrimental for that security and stability that is so necessary for the Middle East and indeed for global security right now.
Yeah, indeed. And just looking at your Twitter feed as well, Jasmine, I mean, you don't single out President Biden for his handling of these issues. You also had some criticism of his predecessor, President Biden. And I'm just wondering what your thinking was in terms of criticizing him for not having brought about that peace deal, the ceasefire deal, sooner than he did. What were you thinking there?
Well, we saw over a period of almost 15 months how the Biden administration really could never manage to get the Israelis to enter into good faith negotiations around a ceasefire deal, nor use any additional pressure leverage that the U.S. had on the Israelis, and especially with Prime Minister Netanyahu, to try to get him to move. And these are not just my words or my opinion. I mean, we heard this time and time again from Israeli negotiators involved in the negotiating process. We've heard it from Arab negotiators from the Arab states. And we've also heard it from Netanyahu's own former cabinet members. In fact, very high-level Israeli officials time and again over the last 15 months have mentioned how Netanyahu has been a huge obstacle towards moving forward on a ceasefire deal and preventing any progress in talks around a post-war scenario in Gaza. I myself have talked to both Arab and Palestinian officials who have reiterated to me that the Palestinian Authority is ready to go into Gaza in a post-war scenario, that Hamas has an understanding that it will not be involved in post-war governance. And what they're saying to me is that they cannot get Prime Minister Netanyahu to budge on his refusal for the PA, the Palestinian Authority, not just Hamas, for the Palestinian Authority to be involved in post-war governance in Gaza. And this is something that neither President Biden was able to make any headway on. And now it appears that President Trump, now we don't know what's being said behind the scenes, but what he has done publicly so far with his statements around Gaza is give new energy, and he's breathed new life into the right-wing extremist narrative in Israel that has since the beginning of the war called for whether it's forced relocation or voluntary migration of Palestinians from Gaza and settlement of Gaza and increasing settlements in the West Bank as well. We've always known that that's the extremist right-wing vision in Israel. And now that camp has basically perceived that they're getting a green light from Donald Trump to continue talking and thinking and planning for that scenario. So we've seen now 2 consecutive US presidents making moves that are taking us away from conversations about a 2-state solution, a continuation of the ceasefire deal, and all of the things that we're supposed to be talking about, and instead talking about things that probably will never come to fruition, because as I said, and I think it's important to reiterate, none of this can happen without the acquiescence and the support of the Arab states in the region, and they have unequivocally said that they will not allow it.
Just lastly, I mean, I put this question to the previous guest, but do you think this idea and the reaction to it could end up damaging or jeopardizing the Abraham Accords?
I think in terms of the expansion of the Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia at the very highest levels of their government have been unequivocal, whether it's the Crown Prince, MBS, or Prince Turki Al Faisal, who recently gave a very clear interview with Christian Amanpour on CNN, basically reiterating that there will be no movement towards normalization with Saudi Arabia unless there is a Palestinian state and a commitment to a Palestinian state. And so when you look at, and the UAE, which is a signatory currently of the Abraham Accords, has also said that they will not allow the forced relocation of Palestinians from Gaza. And even Egypt has been quietly, sending messages that if this kind of conversation continues, that their peace treaty with Israel may be at stake. Now, I don't think we're there yet. I think it's important to just realize how frustrated and disturbed the Arab states have been about Donald Trump's remarks. They thought when he came in, he was campaigning on issues of expanding the peace, expanding the Abraham Accords, avoiding U.S. involvement in the region, especially U.S. military involvement. So everything that's happened in the last week is just a complete 180 from what people were expecting to see out of this press conference with Prime Minister Netanyahu. So I think in terms of the Abraham Accords, in terms of any relationship with the Arab states, with Israel and the Arab states moving forward, you're really going to see a lot more stringent messaging coming out of those states saying that you cannot be a member of this community of nations in the Middle East when you are refusing to move forward towards a peace deal that has been offered to you time and time again. This is going to have consequences for your relationships in the region, and really hoping that messaging will have an impact on President Trump. And we'll see starting tomorrow with King Abdullah's visit to Washington, whether that's going to start to resonate with him.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Jasmine Al-Gamal, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Now, as the war in Ukraine approaches its third anniversary, the US President Donald Trump has revealed that he has indeed held talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Talks, we understand, are aimed at ending the conflict, although few details were given. Well, this is the first official acknowledgement of a conversation between President Putin and a US president since early 2022. Let's take a look.
Well, I don't want to talk about it. And if we are talking, I don't want to tell you about the conversation. It's too early. But I do believe we're making progress. We want to stop the Ukraine-Russia war. And I want to stop it just because I hate to see all these young people being killed. And I expect to have many more conversations. We have to get that war ended. Should have never happened. Would have never happened if I was president. I would imagine I would be meeting with Putin, yes, at the right time. I think at the right time, at the appropriate time.
President Donald Trump speaking there. Well, despite his comments, the Kremlin gave a cryptic response, neither confirming nor denying whether or not the two men had spoken. While Moscow has stated it is yet to receive a credible offer to begin talks on Ukraine. Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Matthew Breiser, former US Ambassador to Azerbaijan, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Eurasia. Ambassador Breiser, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It appears that Presidents Trump and Putin have spoken to discuss Ukraine. If that is indeed the case, how significant is it?
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for having me with you. Well, first of all, Trump didn't say how recently they may have spoken, and it's come out in U.S. media that they have several times, never specified how many, but several times spoken in recent years. So it really does sound like they spoke recently and then like within the last few days. And then based on what Kremlin press spokesman Dmitry Peskov said, he said, well, conversations may have happened, but I don't know all the conversations, so I can neither confirm nor deny. Here's a very strange treatment of this conversation. It sounds like Trump wanted to announce it and Putin didn't want to. So, okay, let's say they spoke. If they spoke, Trump has made clear he wants a deal to end the war. He called himself a peacemaker in his inauguration address, and he knows that for there to be a deal, it's got to be accepted on both sides. So a lot of people, myself included, were worried that Trump was going to sell out Ukraine and compel Zelensky to agree to concessions that would be very difficult for him to accept politically. But I at this point, I don't believe that anymore. I think Trump is probably, he has told Putin, look, you've got to end this war. Zelensky wants to negotiate. If you don't negotiate an end to the fighting, President Putin, then we're gonna increase tariffs or taxes, as Trump calls it, and try to push your teetering economy over the edge, is my guess.
Okay, but that phone call, if indeed it happened, it's not the phone call we were promised on the campaign trail, the phone call that was supposed to end the war in 24 hours. It didn't have that desired effect, did it?
No, and that was always impossible. And President Trump's Ukraine envoy, General Keith Kellogg, he said a couple of weeks ago, okay. Overnight's not possible. I think he said 100 days. And so he's imminently headed to Kiev. He'll be at the Munich Security Conference along with Vice President Vance later this week and is expected to head onward to Kiev. So Trump clearly wants to meet Putin, and I think Kellogg's trip will help set that up. And if there was a call, there probably was between Putin and Trump in recent days, that's probably clearing the way for General Kellogg's visit.
Sure, and indeed this issue, as you say, likely to be very high up the agenda at Munich. I'm just wondering how different you think the red lines set by the United States will be under the Trump administration from what they were under President Biden.
Yeah, first of all, they were kind of pink lines under Biden in some cases because neither President Biden nor National Security Advisor Sullivan ever came out explicitly and said, we want Ukraine to win. They constantly said, we want to position Ukraine to be stronger when there's a future negotiation with Russia. But still, that sounds like supporting Ukraine. I think with Trump, what he wants is simply an end of fighting. And he doesn't care. I think what the Biden administration cared about was that there be a just peace from Ukraine's perspective, meaning not surrendering its territory, but maybe having an ambiguous legal status of the areas occupied by Russia now. I think Trump won't care about those diplomatic and legal important questions, but I think he's just going to go for a ceasefire and then, realizes Zelensky will have to sell it domestically, but won't be emotionally attached to sort of the immorality of President Putin invading and trying to annex another country's territory.
Yeah, I want to talk about President Zelensky and his relationship with Donald Trump in just a moment. But just specifically about red lines. When it comes to Russia's red lines, they don't seem to have changed at all, do they? Because we've heard from the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov, who says all of President Putin's conditions for ending the conflict in Ukraine must be met before any settlement is possible. There is absolutely no shift on their part, is there?
Yeah. I mean, that's classic Russian bluster. I mean, Deputy Minister Ryabkov is a longtime #2 in the embassy in Washington, very well known there. And we all know that what the Russians do great is bluster. As a senior member of the Russian parliament told me 20-some years ago, he said, look, we know that fear, or we believe fear is the most powerful diplomatic tool, so we want to frighten the heck out of everybody. So we never want to look weak. But they know very well that the toll of human life is mounting. Now, granted, President Putin doesn't seem to care much about the loss of soldiers, but there's a limit, not just numerical, but also political in Russia. And the economy, as I alluded to before, is not as strong as Western observers think. Yes, the Russian economy has continued to grow, but inflation is very high. That's led to an increase in interest rates. The interest rate increase also helps the Russian banks that are forced to give loans to the defense sector. But as those interest rates increase, more and more companies are going to go bankrupt. So there's only so far Putin can go with his economy totally on a war footing. Trump understands that, and I think is going to squeeze the Russian economy now.
Yeah, this war isn't just about two presidents, is it? It's about a lot more people than that. A lot more parties are engaged or involved. I'm just wondering how much you think President Trump is running things by NATO allies, before and after conversations with the other key player in all of this, President Putin.
Yeah, that, Tom, is the key question. And me, as I grew up as a Cold Warrior. My whole Foreign Service career was in it. And, for all of us of my generation, NATO was at the center of everything. And we would coordinate every major national security initiative abroad with our NATO allies. I don't think Trump, that's certainly not his instinct. I mean, he questioned whether or not NATO was obsolete, as you'll recall, in his first term. And as we see in the way he handled the Gaza Riviera proposal with Prime Minister of Israel Netanyahu sitting next to him, he completely blindsided Netanyahu when Trump made that amazing announcement. So I think in the case of NATO, there's not nearly as much cooperation by Trump as there would otherwise be. However, having said that, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, they similarly come from the same kind of intellectual background as I do, where you really do coordinate with your NATO allies. But I think Trump won't feel constrained by the allies. He may take their advice, but I think his senior advisors will, of course, care about that coordination. But having said that, I mean, I saw a bunch of signs and international media coverage today from Kyiv with Ukrainians holding up the slogan, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. So they're worried. They're worried they'll be frozen out, and then also maybe that NATO will be frozen out.
Yeah, indeed. And that brings me to the question about President Zelensky. And I'm just wondering what sort of a relationship Kyiv has now with this new US administration, because they were pretty fearful about this scenario, the scenario in which President Trump returned to the White House. That's what they've got now. How do you think they're dealing with it?
Yeah, and Putin was very hopeful Trump would return because he expected Trump would cut off all military aid to Ukraine. And a couple of weeks ago, what Trump said was, okay, Ukraine should not join NATO. The war should end. But we need to continue the military aid to Ukraine for the indefinite future to make sure they can defend themselves should Russia again try to be the aggressor against Ukraine. That was a surprise to a lot of analysts, certainly to me, probably a pleasant surprise to Zelensky. But underlying all of that is the fact that it was Trump's phone call to Zelensky way back when in the first Trump term, when Trump allegedly tried to pressure or even blackmail Zelensky, saying, if you don't provide a negative and derogatory information on President Biden and his son Hunter, we will not provide you military technical assistance. That led to Trump's first impeachment. So, and Trump has said he thinks that Zelensky is little more than a showman. So I don't think Trump likes Zelensky, but I do think Trump wants to cut a deal. And Zelensky's, one of the two parties to the deal.
And Zelensky's quite a cunning operator, isn't he? He's pretty savvy on the world stage, and he's going to be really sidling up to the vice president when the two men see each other in the next couple of days. I mean, do you think J.D. Vance could be sort of the key to Donald Trump's full unconditional support?
I do very much agree that Zelensky will get as close to J.D. Vance as he possibly can. And yes, Zelensky's savvy. I mean, he's a former comedic actor, right? And a fantastically successful entrepreneur. And he knows how to deal with people. But J.D. Vance was one of the first U.S. senators who sounded the alarm against continued U.S. military assistance to Ukraine. So rather than maybe being the conduit or the bridge between Zelensky and Trump, I think Zelensky probably assumes he needs to win over J.D. Vance first if he wants to build a warmer relationship with Trump.
Do you think we're going to be seeing a lot of this? I mean, this is slightly going off piece, but promises that were made on the campaign, that were one thing on the campaign, but now just seem to be, pipe dreams. That phone call being just one of them.
Yeah. Well, I love skiing off piste. That's the best. So thanks for the question. I think Trump he's been shooting from the hip. Yes, notoriously during an election campaign, I mean, proposals are not rigorously thought through because you've got, thousands of staffers all competing for the candidate's attention, trying to say something that's provocative and bold. And so those are not policy initiatives. So it's very common that foreign policy initiatives deviate in reality from the campaign. But Trump is continuing that unpredictability into his administration, by design. He believes if unpredictability is a useful tool to keep his opponents and friends on the back of their heels or on their toes. But also, I think he does not yet have a rigorous policy-making process in place. I spent 4 years on the National Security Council staff of President George W. Bush and was part of a rigorous system for analyzing, proposing, and taking decisions. And that does not yet exist in the Trump administration. The National Security Council staff has nowhere near the number of people it needs at this point.
Just lastly, going back to Ukraine and what sort of a future the country has, I mean, do you think it's inevitable that the outcome of a brokered solution, a peace deal, will mean that the 4 regions of Ukraine that are claimed and mostly controlled by Russia will ultimately be surrendered? Do you think that's inevitable?
No, I think Ukraine will never surrender them, but as a matter of practicality, we'll probably look for a bit of constructive ambiguity and say the legal status of those regions, the 4 regions on mainland Ukraine and Crimea, will be deferred into the future, maybe 15, 20 years or sometime in the future. And for now, let's settle things on the ground such that the war is over and it won't start again.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Matthew Bryser, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be with you.
Now, if they charge us, we charge them. So said Donald Trump as he promised reciprocal tariffs on countries that tax US imports, although he didn't name specific targets. However, tariffs on steel and aluminium are confirmed, with President Trump announcing a 25% import tax on all steel and aluminium entering the United States. Well, according to economists, this move will primarily impact Canada and Mexico, 2 of America's top trading partners for both metals. Well, during his first term, President Trump imposed similar tariffs on steel and aluminium from Canada, Mexico, and the EU. And that raised costs for US car manufacturers, even for the makers of fizzy drinks, which use aluminium cans.
I'll be announcing probably Tuesday or Wednesday at a news conference reciprocal tariffs, and very simply, it's if they charge us, we charge them. Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
What about aluminum, sir?
Aluminum too.
10%?
No, 25%. Nobody can have a majority stake for U.S. Steel. They can for other companies, but not for U.S. Steel.
US President Donald Trump speaking there. Well, we can speak now to Everett Eisenstadt, the former Deputy Director of the National Economic Council of the United States under President Trump. Thank you very much for joining us once again here on Arabiya News. 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports. Is this justified in your opinion?
Tom, if you go back to the initial, under the first administration, that steel and aluminum tariffs were put in place under a Section 232 national security investigation. And one of the determinants of whether to impose tariffs at that time was whether the U.S. had the capacity of producing a certain percentage of steel domestically, and it was determined that we did not. Since then, there's been a number of exclusions, exceptions, negotiated outcomes that have, in some ways, probably diminished the effectiveness of that objective. And so I think that's probably what is driving the president's determination that we need to include those tariffs and increase them on some products.
Just remind us, what was the impact of those tariffs during the first administration and how everything was resolved?
Well, there were a number of different impacts. I mean, this was the first time that tariffs had been imposed writ large, on on a product across the entire globe. And so one of the first impacts is there was a lot of efforts by different countries to distinguish themselves from the type of steel they produced, where they produced it, making the argument that, well, that is not produced in the United States, you can't get it in the U.S. And that had some impact. And so there were different quotas negotiated with different countries. There were exceptions made, and I think that may have, at the end of the day, getting up to that magic number, and if I call correctly, I think it was 85% was the capacity that was sought under the initial ruling, the investigation, that kind of diminished the ability to do that. So this is probably an attempt to kind of recalibrate that and see if we can't get more of that production here in the United States.
Just tell us which sectors of the U.S. economy, obviously ones that use steel and aluminium, are most likely to be affected. Is defense one of them?
Certainly. Well, defense is certainly one of them, but much of that defense is, needs to be domestically produced anyway for the defense industry. But certainly automobiles would be a big consumer. Anybody who produces products that are packaged in aluminum or steel cans would be impacted by this. So really it goes to a number of different industries. I would think some types of construction would be impacted by this as well. Really anyone that's a consumer of steel would probably feel the impacts.
And then, of course, there's U.S. consumers themselves. Are they likely, do you think, to face price rises? What does this mean for the average American?
Well, it depends on what, the consumer, it depends on the product, and it depends on our capacity to meet the needs of the market. So I think there'll be different outcomes for different products. There may be some increase in overall cost to bring production back to the United States. The president has noted that in putting out some of the broader tariff agenda, that there will be disruption, but that at the end of the day, this is in the best interest of the U.S. economy, that it will make the economy grow and ultimately leave the U.S. better off than it was prior to his actions.
But there will be some short-term pain, won't there? Because, for example, the EU is thinking about, reportedly, imposing a tariff on American whiskey, a tariff of around 50%. We've also heard that China has added some American companies to a list of unreliable entities, and one of those companies is Calvin Klein, another is Tommy Hilfiger. I mean, there are going to be sectors of the economy, there are going to be companies that feel real pain from the retaliatory measures taken by countries.
Well, certainly countries have, the right and can make up their own determination of whether retaliation is the right answer. I know we also have pending this concept of a reciprocal universal tariff. And of course, one response is for countries to raise tariffs and go for a tit-for-tat escalation of increasing tariffs and bringing in different parts of the economy. I think the situation with China demonstrates that they're reaching the capacity to retaliate with just tariffs. So they're now looking at other economic coercion methods to try to change the calculus. Now, another option is for a country to say, okay, well, if you want reciprocal tariffs, let's do that. We'll drop our tariffs. We'll go to zero. Let's go 0 for 0. And I think that would be a really interesting dynamic. It might lead to, a more level playing field for everyone involved. So it really depends on how the countries react. But certainly countries could decide that, well, we want to increase tariffs, and that's what we're going to do. They might pick particular products they believe are politically sensitive, like whiskey. That's happened in the past. It's not proven to be that effective. But, they have the right and certainly the ability to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the countries most affected by these latest tariffs will be Brazil, Canada, and Mexico. But so many other countries, including the whole of the European Union, are bracing themselves for yet more tariffs out of the Trump administration. Do you see us reaching a point where all of these countries affected start talking to each other and working out ways to perhaps up trade between themselves and somehow collectively punish the United States? I guess the essence of my question is, might all of this boomerang back to the United States and seriously damage the US economy?
It's really a great question, and there's a lot of different parts to that. One, I think it's important to remember that the U.S. economy, while is very much does export a lot, it is not the most significant portion of our economy. A lot of our growth is produced domestically. We're not super exposed on tariffs. The other piece is that countries may decide to realign supply chains, and that would be an interesting dynamic. I think the president, even in the America First trade policy that he articulated, has expressed an openness to look for sectoral and other types of agreements. There's one thing that's certain: it will be impactful. There's no doubt that imposing these types of measures is going to have a significant impact on the global supply chain and where countries produce and who they trade with. One of the ironies here is that there's no real country that has the capacity to absorb as much output from some of these economies as the United States. So they can create different agreements amongst themselves, but at the end of the day, can those economies actually absorb the output that is being created by their trading partners? And there's very few countries in the world that can do that. It would be wonderful if we this led to an outcome of sustained growth and economic openness for countries, beyond the United States, so that more economies could absorb more output from different markets.
In terms of a sort of a trump card or, an Achilles heel or whatever you want to call it, I mean, China holds the key when it comes to rare earths. I think when it comes to refining them, they really are in charge. And I'm just wondering whether if they suddenly turned off the tap with regards to how many of these refined rare earths made it into the United States, whether they could almost, just looking at the dependency on rare earths in so many different sectors, whether they could really bring the US economy to its knees.
It would be disruptive, and they've actually done that. They're not just the United States. I mean, China's imposed export controls every time they have a conflict, even in the Asia Pacific. Sometimes they'll impose export controls on their critical minerals. And what that tells me is that countries need to think about whether dependence upon China for those minerals is the right idea. If they're going to use it for economic coercion purposes, and it may look to other markets. Now, there are a lot of other critical minerals that are not yet online that probably would accelerate a search for those. Certainly, this is a signal that's something that countries that rely on these critical minerals need to take that into account. It could be impactful, but it also could drive, as I mentioned, a realignment of supply chains, which would actually diminish the effectiveness of China's ability to use those export controls for coercive purposes.
Sure, and people might also pivot away from the United States, because I'm just wondering whether perhaps there is a danger here that these kind of measures damage trust, and to the extent that the United States gets labeled by countries as just being an unreliable trading partner. I mean, is that a risk?
It's quite a shock to the system. I have no doubt about that. I think the United States has been the most open economies for decades, and we've really led the world in market opening. In the grand bargain, most listeners may not have followed, the evolution of trade policy, but the grand bargain post World War II is that the U.S. would open up its economy. We would do that, enable for Europe and Japan and others to have a market so they could rebound and grow, and they did. The WTO was designed to enable other economies to join on similar basis. That didn't actually work out that way. Many of them joined with special treatment. Another element of it is that, the U.S., one of the trade-offs for opening up the U.S. market was the ability to use trade remedies to protect that market in times of by subsidization and surge in imports. And a lot of those trade remedies were diminished by the WTO. So this was a part of a grand bargain, this multi-decade market opening by the United States. At the end of the day, I believe that what has evolved is lack of trust in those institutions and the understanding that, well, maybe we need to do this on our own and try a different methodology and see if we can't get to a fairer trading system that way. So it's definitely a change, and I think it's very something that is highly disruptive and certainly going to make an impact for a long time. We'll have to see how it evolves. We're just beginning. This is I think we're less than 3 weeks into the administration. There's a long way to go, and there's a long agenda ahead. So we'll see how this evolves over the next several weeks and years.
And just lastly, I mean, every time we talk about tariffs, and we've heard about them the last few weeks, lots of countries have been mentioned. But one country that almost never gets mentioned is my country, the United Kingdom. And I'm just wondering why the UK has managed to dodge this tariff bullet. Is there a reason, do you think?
Well, again, we're very early in the administration. I do think there's a favorable balance of trade, at least seen from the U.S. with the Great Britain. That may be part of it. There are opportunities. There's been discussion for many years about a bilateral agreement with the United Kingdom, and perhaps that's the way it will go over time. And I think there's also an affinity that rests between our economies. But there are some elements there that does put the economy, I think, in a different place. But that doesn't mean if we go for a universal reciprocal tariff, well, then that might change, and it certainly could be subject to tariffs as well. It's an evolving picture for sure. We'll see what this week brings, but we do know that tariffs are on the horizon, and they're going to continue to be used as a favored tool for this administration.
Yeah, well, it looks like we put aside our differences with regards to how we pronounce the word aluminium. You say aluminum, we say aluminium. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to have to leave it there. Everett Eisenstadt, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Tom. Take care.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
Sydney, Australia's largest city, is often dubbed as one of the most beautiful in the world. The place offers an attractive mix of modern architecture, historical landmarks, breathtaking views, relaxing gardens, and more. What are the top spots to see in Sydney? Perhaps Australia's most famous man-made attraction, and a worldwide icon too, is the Sydney Opera House. The structure alone is already a unique feat of architectural design and engineering. While built from innovation, creativity, and quite a bit of controversy, the Sydney Opera House remains a remarkable building that's home to over 1,500 performances a year and inviting up to 1.2 million audiences each time. One of the most well-maintained and well-preserved examples of colonial-style architecture in Australia is Sydney's Government House. Since its construction in 1846, it has been home to 27 governors and today remains one of the city's hidden gems, with interiors characteristic of its Gothic influence. Located nearby is the Royal Botanic Gardens, which offers a bevy of colors that's a sight to see in any season. It is kept alive with birds such as cockatoos and sleeping flying foxes that hang from branches, among many other natural wonders. The Australian National Maritime Museum is known for its sensational displays of the country's maritime heritage. Exhibits on display range from full-size to scale ships, an authentic submarine, and other relics of shipping history. The iconic Queen Victoria building is Sydney's ultimate shopping hub. As the building itself is an architectural marvel that boasts of fine details, craftsmanship, and style, it gives tourists an elegant and high-end shopping experience. Worth the hike is Sydney's Blue Mountains, located in New South Wales. Its blue haze horizon offers a breathtaking view and the perfect escape from the busy city. It's a great way to appreciate the scenery, wildlife, and mountain surroundings. Australia's Bondi Beach is known as the most popular in the country. It's close to the suburbs and easily accessible, which allows tourists and locals alike a spontaneous visit. Its great sand and clean waters are what make the beach a popular hotspot.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Your Excellency, I want to kick off by just asking you to walk us through how you see the role of public service, because it's not only a family legacy, but it's also a passion.
Just for some context, for those who might not know, my grandfather was Shaheed Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He was the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Pakistan. He gave us our constitution. He was a voice for the disenfranchised, and he gave his life for his country. He was sent to the gallows by a cruel and conniving dictator who sentenced him for a crime he did not commit. Only for 50 years later, for the same Supreme Court that was stained with his blood to come out and say he was innocent. Only proving my grandfather's last words, which were, "Oh God, help me, for I am innocent." My mother, Shaheed Mohtharma Benazir Bhutto, was the first and youngest female Prime Minister of Pakistan and in the Muslim world. And it was her pursuit for justice for her father which propelled her into politics. And hers was a turbulent journey. She faced police brutality, incarceration, character assassinations, too often used on women, exile. She was basically a mother raising her children, as well as fighting for my father's release from jail, and all the while running and leading the largest political party in Pakistan. So as you can see, it's not an easy legacy to live up to, but it's one that I can't walk away from. For my family, sacrifice, service, fighting for the greater good is all we know. My grandfather used to say that the paradise of God lies under the feet of your mother, but the paradise of politics lies under the feet of the people. And for my family, these are not mere words. This is our ethos.
How do you view the situation for women in Pakistan today?
What I've seen with my mother, and something that I still see today, is that women have to work twice as hard to get half as much acknowledgement as a man. But we are a strong and resilient force. The founder of our nation, Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, used to say that there are two great powers in this world. One is the sword, and the other is the pen. And there's a great deal of rivalry and competition between the two. But there's a third power, greater than both, and that is our women. So the more time I spend on the ground, I see what a strong force we are. And with regards to the issues that women might be facing, whether it's in Pakistan or globally, you name them, we're facing them. Be it inequality, be it security, be it access to healthcare, education. But we are a strong and resilient force, and the more time I spend on the ground, I see that with the power of the vote, we manage to make our voices heard. And for those who haven't voted or for some reason are outside the voting apparatus, they too, when they join forces and rally together, their voice can make cities come to a standstill.
Yeah. You wear two hats. You're a member of parliament as well as being First Lady. How do you square the two? Because you need to be outspoken for your constituents, and at the same time, sometimes it's difficult to be political.
That's true. I've only recently become First Lady as my father became president, and as a widow, he decided to name his youngest daughter First Lady in order to fill that role and make sure that we have a strong representative for women and women's rights.
Do you feel like you have to hold back?
I have to hold back slightly when I'm in the arena of being the First Lady. But as a member of the National Assembly, when I'm on the National Assembly floor, I will be fighting for my people's rights, needs, and whatever they say to do. I'm their public servant.
Yeah. In discussing your family's legacy, it's impossible not to focus on the fact that politics, as you know, can be deadly. Right now, Imran Khan says he's under threat for his life. How credible, in your mind, are those threats?
I think that anyone who says that their life is in danger is a threat that we need to take seriously. But it is heartening to see. It is heartening to see that all the avenues are open to him. For example, all the courts are there for him to fight his cases. All his needs in jail, whether it be for his newspapers or gym equipment, are being met. And I would not wish anyone in Pakistan to face great difficulty, and I hope he will go through the avenues of the court, and the courts will have their verdict.
Are you confident he will have a fair treatment by the judicial system?
I think so. I do believe that he'll be able to put his case forward, and based on what the evidence says, they'll be able to make their decision.
Talk me through this. You have been a passionate proponent of the need for vaccines, particularly with regards to polio. When you see those in the United States, for example, President-elect Trump's pick, RFK Jr., who's a vaccine skeptic, does that worry you?
Right now, I'm more worried about the issues that Pakistan is facing. I'm sure that the United States has a rigorous campaign before you go to school, you have to get vaccinated. Before any large forums, there need to be vaccinations for your child to make sure that at every stage they get their vaccinations. But with regards to Pakistan, I'm an advocate for polio eradication in Pakistan. I've been their ambassador also for the United Nations and Rotary International. And the challenges we face are greatly different.
Yeah.
And some of in 1994, my mother actually gave me the first oral polio vaccine. And this was when she was Prime Minister at the time, and she often said that as a woman leader, she brought an additional role to her office. She brought that of a mother.
Yeah.
So she spearheaded this campaign across the country. Then I would have to say that the changes in government leads to an issue for us on the ground. We had a period of dictatorship under which the reality of the situation was simply not being reported. We went through another change in government under which all the stakeholders, be it the President, the Prime Minister, the Army Chief of Staff, all believed that this was an important issue and they were determined to eradicate this disease. Then we went through another change of government under which the government at the time did not take this seriously. And when the heads of government don't take this issue seriously of vaccination, there's a trickle-down effect. It trickles down to the bureaucrats, it trickles down to the health ministers, the health systems, all the way down to the health workers on the ground.
Yeah.
That this is not a serious issue. So I would have to say that that is one of the challenges that we're facing. A second challenge is that there was a misuse of our vaccination drive for security reasons, which brought about a lot of mistrust amongst our nation. We had clerics preaching that this vaccine would cause infertility and spreading misinformation. And this is an ongoing process. We have to take them on board as stakeholders and explain to them that this is the same vaccine that the United Arab Emirates uses, this is the same vaccine that Saudi Arabia uses, and they've managed to successfully eradicate this disease. So this is an ongoing process. But as a consequence of these two issues, we've had a lot of targeted attacks on our polio workers. There's been senseless killings of our polio workers on the ground, and our security forces also who are protecting them. And their only crime was that they were trying to fight for our future generation. Their crime was that they wanted to ensure that every single child was vaccinated. So these are some of the issues. And lastly, I would have to say our geography. We're on the border with Afghanistan, and we see a great deal of migration that occurs. And in that process, some children miss our national immunization drives. We've made progresses in this. We've put vaccinators at the border. We've put vaccinators in between cities and in between provinces. So we're determined to try and reach every single child out there. I would have to say that these are some of the challenges we're facing. But if I talk to you about the progress that we're making, I would have to say that, and the successes, I would have to say that every single child vaccinated is a success. Every single child we manage to save from this crippling disease is a success.
Yeah.
And until we reach the ultimate goal of a polio-free Pakistan, these are the successes that I need to hold on to and build on.
You mentioned geography. Obviously, you're in a position at this point where geography has a great deal of impact on not just foreign policy, but obviously on the situation for women. How devastating, in your mind, was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, your neighbor? Because at this point, it seems as if the international community doesn't or isn't able to help those women. We gave them great promise, and then we abandoned them.
With regards of the way the exit from Afghanistan was conducted, I think that record speaks for itself. It's devastating to see, but we have to have faith in the Afghan government and their systems to try, and we have to ensure that as a country like Pakistan, who it's our neighbor, we can try and encourage them to, take on board our women and perhaps not go with such stern language when it comes to them. But it's also that they are their own country, and we can't dictate them to tell them what they should do.
Yeah. Do you happen to think that there's something that the international community could do to help women there that they're not doing? Is there a pressure that we could exert?
I think that it's a very difficult situation because in the manner in which they stayed and they exited, it causes great difficulty for anyone in the world to dictate to them what they should or should not be doing.
Yeah.
So I think engagement with the Afghan government is the best option we have.
Yeah. Tell me this, when you think back to the legacy of your mother, not just as Prime Minister, but also as a parent, what are some of the lessons?
As I get older, even 16 years on from her assassination, I realize that there was a lesson in everything she said and did. Yeah. And despite the greatest odds, she managed to endure with incredible elegance, dignity, and grace. And if you've ever seen Succor Jail and the conditions she was in, you would see how difficult that was. So in the face of adversity, I can only hope and pray to have half as much elegance, dignity, and grace as she did.
"16 years on, what is your advice to the women in this room as they look to take their place, not just as women, as mothers potentially, but also as those who are leading corporations, excited about being entrepreneurs and startups, and also going into politics?"
My message to young women would be to believe in yourself, remain steadfast in your values, never underestimate the power of your voice. Leadership is not about privilege and position. It's shaped by purpose and persistence. And we must remember that the road ahead will be challenging, but we must embrace education, foster empathy, commit ourselves to uplifting all those around us. True leadership lies in service to others and the pursuit for justice, opportunity, and equality for all. My message to the younger generation would be that you are the architects of a brighter future.
Walk me through this one. As women, we often discuss how we are not just subject to the regular standards. We are also subject to even higher standards in what we wear and what we say and how we do our hair. Do you believe that that's evolving?
I would hope and pray that this evolves. However, I will give you an example. Well, it's heartening to see the number of women leaders across the world today.
Yeah.
I still think that we need to face issues that our male colleagues don't necessarily need to face. I can give you an example. I was in an interview with a prominent international news organization, and at the time we were talking about the crackdown on our party, the fear I had for my father's life in jail. This was his 2019 persecution against him, not to be confused with the 90s persecution against him. And at the end of the interview, I still get asked, "But do you like to cook?" So as women,
what do you like to cook?
But as women, we have to still prove today that yes, we can cook, we can clean, and we can lead. And we must simply have to endure and keep going.
Yeah, I mean, the unfair criticism I think that we've seen for women politicians across the board in the West as well. I mean, Hillary Clinton, not attacking her words per se, or challenging her words, but challenging her choice of outfit. Yeah.
I try to model my outfits on the basis of my mother.
Yes.
And it brings me a lot of comfort to have her white dupatta style around me. It makes me feel that I have her with me at all times.
And embrace. And just to close out our session, in your mind, where are we today in this region? Because the extraordinary strides made right here in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, for example, are inspiring, but the region still has more to do.
I think, number one, we must acknowledge the United Arab Emirates. Just look at this platform today. Many of our neighbors don't have this platform, and this is truly a global event. People from all across the world, all across nations, everyone has an inspiring story, a history. So I think that we need more platforms like this, and hopefully the region around us will also evolve into understanding the importance of women, giving them an opportunity, giving them a glimpse into public service and seeing how well they shine.
Yeah, and speaking of that glimpse into public service, what would be your suggestion to those in the audience today who are looking potentially to go into public service?
I believe that the world is your oyster and there is an opportunity everywhere.
Yeah.
And especially in the United Arab Emirates, just look at the number of cabinet members. Look at the people in His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid's office. The number of women has grown every single year. And I think that other countries around the world need to model this.
Yeah. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Hadley.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern,